screen too. Yes, okay, so as I was explaining, we're in the quadrant of spring in this seasonal round graphic that I created, working for the tribe. The outside here ring is the Roman calendar months, and then inside that is the Salish, identifying
Inside
the
that
months
is the
through
Salish
and
and
Kalispe
Kalispe.
culture. So we just got done with the month of March there, which is the month of the geese. Basically, that means that the geese are coming back at this time, and they're coming back from the southerly direction. They're wintering in the south, and they're coming back. And then we come into April, which is, we're into this month right now, and it's the month of the buttercup. And the buttercup is pretty much done right now, is my observations out there on the land. The buttercup is a cultural bioindicator. I'll be talking about bioindicators. One is the bioindicators in general are identified through the environmental sciences. And then we have the cultural bioindicator, which I apply to man and their observations of the environment. So essentially the cultural bioindicator is the observation of our natural world around us and how it changes through the year. Certain periods of their change identifies certain activities that we as man should engage in within that calendar. So instead of saying we're going to dig Bitterroot at a certain time, like say on the Roman calendar, we may not be able to do it. The Bitterroot may not be too early or it may be too late in harvesting. So we take the indicators of nature that tells us the appropriate time to dig Bitterroot. So we've got a kind of a strange situation right now. I've observed out there the Bitterroot emerging already, even before May. So what does that tell us? It may tell us that we've got an issue with global climate change. And this calendar is getting a bit out of sync, I guess you could say, because the Bitterroot shouldn't be coming up until another few weeks or so. So we may have to adjust that Salish Kalispe calendars, months, who knows. But at this time, I do notice that the Bitterroot is coming up at least 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. So, okay. Okay, so let's talk about Bitterroot. Bitterroot is one of the main root crops for our tribes here, and for many other tribes. The camas is also somewhat distributed to that extent too. It's kind of an interesting thing when I was looking at the distribution. It kind of mimicked the through the last ice age, they may have been distributed by the outwash of the last glacial Lake Missoula, pushing the Bitterroot out and the camas out into the, I'm not sure where they were to go with that. Okay, so how we look, be able to see things up close?
Yeah, especially if you come up.
So we're talking about let's talk about our first roots of the season. And I'm going to go ahead with my slideshow to get to some slides that I was working with my students recently, talking about the first root. And here we're getting into some of the we're getting into some of the out on cultural landscape tours. And so in the spring, one of our first tours is to view the first roots that are coming up. And these are the plants that for the Bitterroot does. And beauty is, spring beauty is also identified as the Indian potato. It's a small little bulbous type of a root that's probably as big as your little finger, the tip of your little finger, and sometimes as big as your thumb, the tip of your thumb. And it's very crispy in a way. And I don't have any of the examples of that, but the spring beauty is identified as the Indian potato. And then we also observed the yellow bell. Yellow bell is up right now in great numbers. And it also has a small bulbous kind of a corm, I believe they call it on there, that's edible. And so I've eaten a fair amount of those also. And then also the glacier lily is up too. The glacier lily, you can eat the whole thing. You can eat the flower head and the leaves and the stalk, and of course the root of that too. A little bit of a warning on the glacier lily. It does have a bit of some oxalic acid, if I'm pronouncing that right or identifying the right acid in there. And in one sitting, if you eat a lot of those, it can upset your stomach a little bit. So be careful with that. A lot of times when these roots are dried, some of that, a little bit more of a toxic levels of some of the chemicals that are in some of these roots, they dissipate out. So many times, if you weren't eating them fresh, then you were drying them, and they became a bit more mild in their taste. So that's just one little warning on the glacier lily that I've noticed, okay? So let's go back to our bitterroot. Okay. So as you can see, the bitterroot down below to the left of that image there, that's what first emerges from the bitterroot in the spring. And these are the kind of the leaves. They're kind of a thick, succulent type of leaf, that arrangement that comes out of the ground. This is the ideal time to dig the bitterroot. You don't want to dig it when it has the flower, as indicated up into the upper right corner. Basically what happens is that the time it flowers, there's a lot of energy there and goes into the flower. We want all the energy that's contained in the root and not the flower. Also, there's a sheath of skin, as Jennifer can show you on the other roots down here. It's a black sheath of skin on the root, and when it's in flower, it's hard to get that black sheath on the root off. We need we eat it, just as you see in this photo of this woman drawing the bitterroot on a piece of canvas or hide there. The roots are really nice and white. The women are proud. They have a pride in their work, and if the whitest roots, you will get the highest honor as a woman for harvesting it at the right time and making it clean white roots are she's then praised for that. So this is she's showing you right there the roots that have the black sheath on that, and they need to be cleaned off before they're eaten. Okay. The Bitterroot, as a main staple, kind of a starchy root crop of some sort, like the title indicates. It is bitter, and so a lot of times the traditional way of cooking it would be to boil up the root and add berries to it. So huckleberries, service berries. Usually, of course, in the traditional seasonal round, those berries have been already harvested last fall or last summer, and then dried and stored all winter. So you'd be using up probably the last of your berries, making a dish of berries and bitterroot. It's also not only just for sustenance and nutrient value, it also has medicinal values that helps to strengthen your heart, as the elders have talked about and have taught me about. Okay, so there's a wonderful story behind the bitterroot too. It happened during a time of when there wasn't many big game around and the food was scarce. So Julie Cajun had put together a really nice story of the bitterroot. I believe it's published through OPI also. So there's access to that story. And I probably won't do the story justice as the book does, but I'll go through the story with you. Essentially a village, a band of Salish were camped and they made it through the winter, but game was very scarce and other root crops. It was kind of a drought that kind of happened, and the animals moved off into higher ground, and it was a little difficult to get the food sources they needed. And so it got tough. People were starting to starve, and people were having a rough time in this encampment. And so the wife of the chief, she said, "I'm going to go down to the river and pray for food, for guidance. Well, how can we find some food? Ask the Creator to help us." So she goes down by the river and she does her prayers, but she still feels very hopeless that she can't feed her people and her family. There's no food around. And so then the Creator sees this, and he sends down a bird, I believe it was meadowlark, and to tell her that the tears that you have cried have hit the ground, and those are the bitterroot now, and we are going to give you the bitterroot so that you can feed your family. And her tears that hit the ground, she looks down and there's the bitterroot. And so then the Creator teaches her how to harvest it with a digging stick, and how to cook it and how to prepare it and take it back to her family. And so she dug many roots that were a product of her tears on the land there, and brought them back to her camp, and was able to feed her family. And so in short, that's I'm really butchered that story. So I encourage you to look that story up, story of the bitterroot, and review that. And use that in your class if you want to, as a nice springtime class subject to talk about the first roots and such. But really, the bitterroot is an amazing plant. It is. If you can see that image down to the lower right, we have flags there. When I worked for the Salish Kootenai College about 15 years ago, on my first teaching job, we were exploring the best practices for harvesting and replanting the bitterroot in areas where the bitterroot was, and that it's not there anymore, or it's being compromised by grazing or development, or installing crops and stuff like that. So we started to practice. We put these 8x8 plots out, and we practiced with the best practice of harvesting the bitterroot. And there's some of the best practice of harvesting the bitterroot is after you dig the bitterroot, when it's in before it flowers, is that you take off, when you're taking the sheath off of that root, you take some of the root off of it too, and you put it back in the ground where you just dug the bitterroot up. There's a high degree of probability that that root will then regrow in the ground that you just dug there. So the Latin name for bitterroot is Lewisia redivivia. Lewisia is basically indicating that Lewis of the Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery, they did not discover the root, but they cataloged the root. And so then he put his name on there. Latin word for redivivia is basically reviving itself. It has the properties of reviving itself, put into a plant press and put into a dark cabinet. This has happened to some of the botanists. They've pressed the plant in a plant press. They put that plant into a cabinet for many years, 2 or 3 years. They bring out that bitterroot sample. They lay it on their desk. Through the windows, the sun hits that root. It starts to grow again. So it's amazing. After 3 to 5 years, it's growing. That the root is, and I can attest to that. We had two years ago, some of our students, we went out and we dug some bitterroot, and I left this one bitterroot on the top of my desk cabinet all winter, and the next spring it started to bloom. It actually had flower buds on it, and it bloomed. And so then we ended up using that as to develop our logo for our culture and language program. So the plant is really resilient in that way, is able to revive itself. So putting a piece of that root back into the ground will assure it's going to grow again. So when we teach our tribal members how to dig this plant, we teach the best practices in sustainability of harvesting the bitterroot. Okay. Where do we go from here? Some of the bitterroot, and maybe one day you'll be able to try some of the bitterroot at some time. And I'm sure some areas where you are at, you probably have bitterroot in the areas. Missoula Valley had contained a lot of bitterroot, and maybe I might have a photo of, So all of Missoula Valley was full of bitterroot, and the foothills, and the Bitterroot Valley full of bitterroot. And then on the reservation, most of the bitterroot is located on the west side of the reservation, Camas Prairie, and through Hot Springs area. And so right now, I believe, so the tradition for the Salish and Kootenai in harvesting is that one of the elderly women from the Salish Kootenai Culture Committee will go out and check the bitterroot at times. And when this happens, then they schedule the ceremony, and they go out to certain tracts of areas of the reservation where they reserve places for the culture committee to go, and they invite a small group of people. You don't want a really big group, because that's a big impact on these areas. So traditionally, the individual bands and families would go to their respective areas where they would always dig bitterroot. So as a group, they try to keep that as a smaller numbers, so it isn't such a big impact. But as the tradition goes, as they gather at the bitterroot grounds, they first gather around in a circle and they pray to the bitterroot. They welcome the bitterroot back. It's been all winter, and they look forward to that, because that's also a strong indicator of spring and more root foods to come. So the elderly woman instructs a young woman, a young girl, to go out and dig the first bitterroot. She'll dig the first bitterroot, and then she'll bring that bitterroot back to the elderly woman. And that woman will then inspect the bitterroot and pull the sheath off. And then she'll declare it is time to dig our roots. And no one can dig roots until the woman, till the prominent elderly woman deems it is right to start digging. And so then after that, then individual families go out and they start to dig. So then they dig at this plot, take that bitterroot back to the Salish Kootenai Culture Committee, and then they boil it up and they have a feast. And so they have other foods, but then they'll boil up the bitterroot and add berries to it, and then serve that deer meat, venison, and bison if we have it, and other foods. People will stand up and talk about the importance of these first roots and the respect for these roots and how important they are to our perpetuation of our culture. Spätlum. Spätlum is the Salish word for bitterroot. Okay, so take a little bit of a breather there. I can kind of go on, and sometimes I've got to watch myself. I get in different directions.
Are you kidding? We love it.
Thank you, Jennifer.
We love hearing Tim.
So, and if, I don't know, sometimes there could be some questions on chat. I don't know if we want to entertain that right now, but if.
Is it boiled like a stew?
Yes. Well, traditionally it was just boiled on its own and added with berries. But I see more and more individuals playing or experimenting with the bitterroot. And when I was working for the tribe, or for the Salish Kootenai College 15 years ago, we were encouraging families to start eating more traditional foods. So we thought, well, let's get creative with the bitterroot and see what we can do with it. So we were stir frying with the bitterroot with other roots. We were adding to soups like stews, and so we kind of mixing it up a little bit that way. There's another way that was traditionally used by the elders, described it, is that they actually ground up the root after they dried it and ground it up into a powder and then put it into a buckskin bag, which then they would be able to just take some of that powdered bitterroot out and add it to their soups, and it would thicken up their soups and add nutrients to their soup, or they would even sprinkle it on other foods like meats and things like that and eat it that way. So that's another traditional way of preparing the bitterroot that way. Sometimes it was easier to pack away and store if you ground down the root, because as the root on itself, as you can see, it's kind of bulky, and you can't, and and when you bust it up into smaller pieces, you can store it into the buckskin bags a little bit easier. Okay. Another way of cooking it up was when it was pounded down into powder, is to actually mix a little bit of water with it, and then make a cake of that, and then you could cook that on a hot rock, or you could fry it in a fry pan. So that's another way that you can cook it.
Question was,
this PowerPoint has way too many slides. It's really heavy, megabytes, gigabytes, because I use it everything, all the different seasonal rounds. I use it, and even the other technologies, hide technologies, stone technologies, things like that. And then I have plant technology. But I think what I might be able to do is to section out the plant, the ethnobotany of it a little bit more specifically. And I would be willing to share that with the seasonal round graphic and such. So yes, it may be adjusted. I may adjust that PowerPoint to fit our session here, our ethnobotany session. But yes, and I can work with Jennifer on distributing that to you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. So yeah, spring.
Yeah. So Let's get into, part of the title of this was technologies, ethnobotany and the technologies built around ethnobotany. So I'm going to go and gather a few items here. So bear with me a bit.
He's brought a lot with him, so hang tight for just a moment. Anything else I can grab?
I think this is it right here. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you can see me here pretty good with this. I think that might work out pretty good. Did that work good,
Yeah.
Jennifer? All right. We have one of the most important tools here. I almost want to venture to say that it was more important than the bow or the spear, the bow and arrow and spear this is the traditional digging stick. It's a Salish word is called petsa. And this is a digging stick that I made.
Oh, can you stop the PowerPoint and just have it on your screen?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so stop share. And, oh, yeah. How do I? There we go. All right. How does that look?
Good.
Okay. So traditionally,
Smiling.
so yes, the petsa, it's the traditional digging stick that all indigenous people, most all over the world, this is a universal tool. And here we have, the first didn't have a handle on there, like this one here, this elk antler. It was probably just a stick, used to dig into the grounds, or maybe we in our human development we were using our hands, and then we figured, oh, okay, well why don't we just pick up a stick, lay on the ground, or pulled off the tree, right? And I tried that. I went through that process of discovery, and I pulled a branch off of a tree, broke it off, and just used my hands and got down on the ground and dug some roots. Well, it after a while, I had some blisters on my hands, and I was on my knees, and it didn't work very well. It kind of wore me out a bit. And so then I realized that there's the development of tools was most important, kind of ergonomics in a way of being able to work with creating a tool that fits you well, so that you don't tire out, or you don't hurt your hands and or your body. If this digging stick, as an elderly woman says, when you make a digging stick, you have to make it for your size. If it's too short, you're going to hurt your back. And if it's too tall, then you can't get the leverage to push down into the ground. So there's an ideal size for these for each individual. And so they have to be customly made, basically, so you get the right, so that you can end up digging roots all day. Okay, so what is this made of? It's made of a shaft of hardwood and a handle. Sometimes the handle is just made of wood, but more traditionally it was made of antler. And one beautiful thing about this, as you see, you don't see this on this handle, but the owners, the women who owned and these digging sticks, a lot of times they would incise a design around the handle, indicating it is their digging stick. And then sometimes there are lines that go around, or patterns of lines or dots that go around the handle, indicating how many times they dug roots and the seasons through there. So in some of the museum pieces that I have researched in the museums of these antler petsa handles, they have designs on them. And those designs, so when we look at any kind of artifact or material cultures, the material culture of any groups of people, they ornament, and the art has meaning to it. Ownership, times that they went and dug the root, and they put those indications of time and ownership in beautiful designs. And I don't have a photo to show you, but some of these designs are really nice. And so then when we look at pottery and other applications of design and art in the material culture, that's the origin of that art. It has meaning, it has ownership, it has sometimes it has a map on there, things like that. Where did I dig them? How when did I dig? Things like that. So that's a way to understand art in the material culture. Okay. Hardwood. Most of our serviceberry, those are hardwoods, and they're really good for the digging stick, because you don't want this digging stick to break on you when you're applying pressure to push it into the ground next to the root, because you sometimes you are pushing a lot of your weight into it, and you're bent over the digging stick. If that was to break, I could maybe impale myself onto the digging stick. So it's got to be a good hardwood with that, and it's got to be a strong antler. This little area right through here is probably the weak spot of the antler, and this is actually modeled after artifacts that are in museums that I was able to study the handle and how it was constructed. So this is constructed after actual artifact study of the artifacts of digging sticks. We have a hardwood. This hardwood here is from a plant called ocean spray, and is really one of the densest woods out there. It even had the nickname of ironwood in the Northwest here. So and it feels heavy too. It feels nice and heavy and substantial to that. Another good wood would be serviceberry, hawthorn, as I mentioned earlier, yew, the western yew wood is also very good. Okay, so
Tim,
yes.
How would they drill a hole through the antler?
Oh, okay. That's kind of fun. I could demonstrate that a bit too here for you. So I suppose we could maybe use. So I've got a traditional fire building kit here. Here's a bow rib. See, it's got a shaft here, and then I've got a stone point there. And this stone point is napped or flint napped. This is probably about a about a three.
You're right.
I was looking
Perfect.
for okay. So yeah, that's got a hardwood shaft. This is actually mock orange shaft, and then I have a pitch glue that I make that I'll be talking about later. Made from tree pitch and charcoal.
You are, but this isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, you're treating it.
All right.
Here, this will help you. You do you.
Do what?
You just keep presenting it.
Okay.
I'm just gonna.
So this drill, I use to drill into wood and wood. I'm just drilling the,
Oh, now this one's freezing and that one's not freezing. There it goes. There we go.
The tree that flint knapped drill point onto the shaft of wood. There we go. Okay. Nice. Okay, great.
Okay, if you're over here, you should be unmuted on. Yeah, okay. So apparently this is a little bit more stable, so I've unmuted you here.
Okay.
Apparently it's stable, so I've unmuted you.
Okay.
All right, rolling with it. Okay, so they could see, but they couldn't hear the explanation. If you could repeat just a little bit of it.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Up here on this one.
Okay. Oops.
Oh, well, all right. I guess we're just using this one. That's okay. This is working. It's all good. Hopefully, if anything happens to the Zoom and the internet just quits, just please come back. I will have to restart it. But yeah, Tim's Zoom just crashed on his machine. So here we are. Yay. Oh, this is actually great. I think you look good here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially, the bow here turns the drill, and that stone will then drill into antler and bone. And it takes a little bit. Sometimes, I have to drill a pilot hole in that antler. Could you grab me that antler right there? Thank you.
Wow, that's a heavy one.
Yeah.
That's a heavy one.
Yeah, this is a nice elk antler here. And this is what would be used. This here, these long tines right here would be cut.
You can look right at this camera.
About right there.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. And then the hole would be drilled about right in that spot right there. With the bow drill, with my bow drill there through the stone. And it takes a little bit, and sometimes I have to resharpen that point a little bit there, but that works really well. So even if I had like a shell and things like that, that also works well with drilling a hole. For my like making beads, I can make a smaller drill, 1/8 inch drill or so to make for pendants and things like that put on there. Okay. So that is one way.
Oh yeah, you know what? If you could demonstrate that what you were talking about last night about the height, because you can see it better on this camera than you could before.
Okay. About the correct size of.
Yeah, and just how the leverage works. This is a great science lesson.
Yes. So what do we have here? Is that better? Okay. So when we look at the science of this digging stick, essentially this is a crowbar to lever the plants out of the ground. And I had a student ask me, so why isn't the shaft straight? Why do we have a curve to it? Well, that curve is very important. As in a crowbar, it's got a straight shaft, but it's got a kind of a levered, angled foot to it. And that angled foot basically is represented in this curve and this final little curve here. It's kind of comes out straight, but this is the curve here that really that mimics the levered foot on a crowbar. So pushing it into the ground, essentially you are you're pushing it over, and you're pushing your weight down over into the plant. A lot of times one push into the plant in front of it, one on each side of it, and the fourth one will usually lever the plant out of the ground. So efficiency too. You don't want to be using a lot of energy to get those roots out of the ground. You want to be able to efficiently do that. So here, this is good on my back. I'm not down too far, and I'm not way up here where I'm trying to push it down like this. It's just perfect for my weight to bear down on the handle here and push into the ground there. Okay, so also what's really important is that you need to strengthen the tip of the digging stick. And as you can see here, it's darker, is because, and it's a little dull right now, but I'll have to sharpen it up for bitterroot digging. But it's fire hardened. So that's part of the sciences or indigenous sciences there, is that you can kind of burn or burnish this with fire and flames in the fire, and it'll strengthen that wood, and your tip will last longer. Now, this digging stick here has pretty much a fixed handle on here. It's tied with rawhide, this is elk rawhide, and essentially that's just a hide that is scraped on both sides and then cut into strips and then soaked in the water to get it really pliable. And when it's soaked in water, it gets really soft and you can stretch it. And then when it starts to dry, it starts to come back to its original shape. And so then it wraps itself. I wrap it around there, and when it's drying, it wraps even more tightly on there after it dries, and it creates a solid connection between your wood and your antler there. Now, the other style of digging stick, which is the most, it's just such a beautiful way of operating, or the use of the digging stick, is that it was friction fit on here. The antler fit here on each end so tight that it wouldn't come off, that you had to kind of knock it off a little bit, but it wasn't tied with rawhide there. It just fit so well on each end of it that during the day, like you dig in the morning till afternoon, and your tip is getting dull, you can pull the handle off this side, turn it around, put it on the other side, and that tip then is another new working tip of the digging stick, and you can continue to work through the day.
That is such an incredible example of a simple tool,
yeah,
but really smart, really smart. We do have another question. Would children have their own digging sticks to help dig, or was it strictly an adult activity?
Nope, the women would make digging sticks for the youth too, because usually the men didn't. As Felicity McDonald, I worked with her quite a bit, an elderly Bitterroot Salish woman who I worked a lot with the Bitterroot there, and she said yes, they would make digging sticks for the young too, because they were always with the young while the men were out hunting and protecting the root digging women and kids. The men were out protecting them and hunting and such. And there's a pretty good story to that. She said, and most of the women that I talked to, they took great pride in their knowledge and their ability to dig the roots. She said, she kind of put it this way: when we get into a camp on our Bitterroot grounds there, and we get our camp set up, the men, they go out and they go hunting up in the mountains and stuff like that. And I know that after we get camp ready, we get food going, and the next day I'll probably start digging my roots. She says, men come back from hunting and sometimes they don't have it. I asked them, oh, what'd you get? And they said, no, we don't have anything today. No deer up there, no elk, no other animals. She said, but me, I know my roots. They're right over there, right? We camp right next to them. And I can go over there, and you know what? The bitterroot, they don't run from me. And I know I can get bitterroot all the time, but those men, they'll run around, they'll come back, and they'll be empty-handed. But boy, I got my roots. And so then she'll talk about teaching her daughters the appropriate time to dig their roots and how important it is to have those clean roots. Like I said, here's the black sheath of those roots, and you clean them off to get those nice white roots as you see here.
Here's another follow-up question. Would children be told which ones to dig, ones that they wouldn't mind if something happened to, such as, ones past prime, or would they practice digging rather than practical digging?
Mm-hmm. No, they would be engaged with the real thing. They'd be taught right off the bat the most mature bitterroot to take and to leave the younger bitterroot, the smaller bitterroot in the ground. And not to identify plants that they don't want to be digging that might have an adverse effect to them, poison or toxic of some sort. There was the high regard or respect for the plant, and I will engage in another story here with Felicity. But there was a sense that you don't take all that is there, that you take only a quarter or maybe a third of the amount of plants that are there at the ground that you're harvesting. So there are usually the elderly women they watch that and they gauge that, and they will stop the harvest once it gets to that point. So, okay. One of my favorite stories to talk about is with Felicity McDonald, and this is the true essence of what ethnobotany is too. We were out. I was in my previous kind of transformation of myself. I was in the Tribal Historic Preservation Office doing archaeological work, and so part of our archaeological work wasn't just to identify archaeological sites, but also to identify those traditional use areas, bitterroot grounds, burial grounds, hunting grounds, and things like that. So our work through archaeology wasn't just for the preservation of artifacts and sites, but it was for those traditional use areas that our tribal members continue to use. So we were over by the Camas Prairie area. We were driving around there, looking at the bitterroot, and Felicity says, "Oh, why don't you stop here? Stop the car, and let's go look at those bitterroot over there." So we walked over, and it was in a small area, probably about 20 feet by 30 feet, little area of a small patch of bitterroot, very sparse too. And we walk over to it, and she just goes, "Oh, we got to start working with this bitterroot here. We got to start working with it." And I was like going, "Well, Felicity, there's not very much here. It's really sparse. If we come in here and start digging, won't we kind of compromise it, or won't we almost dig it out?" Or she said, "No." She said, "No." She said, "First off, we have a deep relationship with bitterroot. Bitterroot is our friends, and we miss each other. And when the winter is over and when that root comes out, we look for each other, and we look for it, the bitterroot, and the bitterroot's looking for us. And so when we come upon it like this small little patch, said that it makes the bitterroot feel good and makes us feel good, make this connection." And she said, and that's not only all, it's how we dig it too. She said, she pointed out the ground. You see those 4 bitterroot right down there. She says, you see one of those bitterroot is the most mature in there. And you'll take that bitterroot right there. You'll dig that out. She says, And just our act of digging it and disturbing that soil will then allow water and nutrients to go to those other three that are nearby. And those other three will benefit from our interaction and taking that one bitterroot. That one bitterroot that gives itself to us, and we use that bitterroot to eat. The other ones we'll leave and let them grow again. And so then she said, so after we start working with this year, it'll grow and it'll grow, keep on growing because we've reestablished that relationship to our bitterroot here. And it is, and the way we harvest it is the bitterroot likes that. And so we'll be okay with it. So this patch will grow. And I was reflecting on what she said, and I just, that's the really epitome of ethnobotany. It really is that relationship and sustainable ways of harvesting that plant to ensure that it's there again next year. So
it also supports that landscape management, like fire on the land.
yes, oh, very good point. Yeah, just not too far from that little patch down farther in the valley floor is some camas grounds, and by Camas Prairie, which is named appropriately because of the camas around there. And we went and looked at that area too. Of course, the camas was coming up, but what didn't have the blue flowers, but it was coming up in this nice new early stalks, so little long leafy material. And she said this is the best time to dig the camas too. Most of the women prided themselves on digging most of the roots before they flower, because some of the energy is taken out of the roots and goes into the flower. And so the women said that if you can get there before it flowers, then that's going to be a better so also she said at this camas ground, it was getting overgrown by other weeds coming in, some domestic grasses. And she said there needs to be a fire that kind of comes through here to clean up the camas ground and to clean up bitterroot grounds too, because right now we do have a lot of domestic grasses that are encroaching on the native grasslands, and the bunch grasses that grow natively in the Palouse Prairie, they identify a lot of these grasslands around the reservation as Palouse Prairie grasslands, and they're bunch grasses. So they have here's a bunch here, here's a bunch here, but there's a little space here, a little open space in between those bunch grasses where the bitterroot grows, where they're not shaded very well. And usually the bitterroot comes out a little bit earlier than the grass does and because if the grass came out earlier than the bitterroot, it would shade the bitterroot and it wouldn't get the sun it needs to grow. So the bitterroot comes out at the appropriate time. And so not competing with grasses, but domestic grasses are coming up quite early in the spring and shading the bit can shade the bitterroot out. So a fire off and on helps to clean up those bitterroot grounds and camas grounds.
I just shared the link for the CSKT curriculum in the chat as well as on the resource page, and I also shared the link for the elder video on climate change.
Yeah, there's also, I should mention on SKC TV, there used to be, at the college here, they used to have a public television station where they also had a lot of videos of elder interviews and other events. And I believe there's some bitterroot gathering events that are on video that you can look for. Go on YouTube,
Yep.
SKC TV, YouTube videos. And there's a lot of elder interviews and other cultural events that are there. And I think there's some bitterroot digging also. So there's another good resource.
That's great. I didn't even know about that. I just posted one of the videos on the resources.
Oh yeah, that's fairly new. That Roy Bickrane, who's part of the SKC Media, he's cataloged and got a lot of those videos to the public now. So there's a great resource. Okay. It's kind of odd with the camera behind me.
Yeah, and I just focused it on this because of the instability.
Okay,
So we're good here.
We're doing good like this.
Yeah, great. you know, I can't sit here, and I'm sorry you can't see me. I can walk around, but that's okay. But I can't sit here and not look at the cedar bark basket. And several years ago, I don't even know what year that was anymore, but Tim and I presented together at the National Indian Education Association conference, and I was gifted one of these incredible baskets, and it is just one of my most cherished gifts ever.
Yeah, this is one of the bark technologies. I really enjoyed working with bark. Amazing things you can do. And you know, if we reflect on hunter-gatherers, you know, I'm always want to be very inclusive to this, because every one of us comes from a hunter-gatherer society, as my introduction had talked about. And so we, as hunter-gatherers, so to say, is more of an anthropological or archaeological term describing us, is that hunting and gathering things. Well, when you gather things, you need to carry things right back to your camp, right? And so then the creation of containers. There was a lot of, especially in the Northwest here, the western part of Montana, in some ways we consider the Kasanka, the Kootenai people, Kalispeh, the Ponderay, and the Salish, the Bitterroot Salish people. They live in the mountain area, so I consider them kind of inner mountain tribes. And so then most mountainous areas will have trees, a lot of trees, where the plains trees will be somewhat limited and such, unless you're down in the river bottoms or some of these smaller mountain ranges in plains. So identifying one of the OPI's Indian Ed for All standards is that all tribes are unique on themselves, and so is the material culture of those tribes. They follow sync with that. So Intermountain tribes, a lot of their containers will be made of bark. So the Plains tribes, a lot of their containers will be made of hide material. So the parfleche is kind of considered more of a Plains tribe technology, with hides for containers to carry things. And then in the Intermountain area, we had a lot of bark. We also had a dog bane to create twined bags, a large envelope-like opening bags that we put roots in, collected roots also in, and stored food in. Bark baskets is a good storage container for foods, because cedar, it you know, actually bugs and pests don't like cedar a lot, so they'll stay away. They won't get into a lot where the food, the berries, or the dried meat, things like that are stored in them. So yeah. So anyway, this is one of my first bark baskets I've made, and this is probably about 25 years old, maybe even 30 years old here, and it's getting pretty beat up. Some of the ties and binding of the roots, I use the cedar root to sew the sides of the bark. They're starting to break up a little bit, and some of the support for the brim is kind of getting a little compromised and such, but I still use it for roots and berries. This is actually really good for berry picking too. It's just amazing. You can kind of see, well, you might not be able to see it now, but there is huckleberry stains in there.
Cool.
But form and function. Here we're starting to talk about form and function in design and maybe engineering these the material culture of tribes, especially with this here. So as you can see, this is just a long rectangular piece of cedar bark, and it's twice the size of this. So this cedar bark was a rectangular piece about this long and about this wide. And so in the center, it was folded up, and then the sides were sewn, and then the brim was opened up with a piece of willow to keep its shape open that we have here.
Does that harm the tree when you harvest the bark like that?
Oh, no, it's, well, of course, there's a bit of an impact of the tree for sure, but we don't take the bark all the way around the tree, because then you're interrupting the transfer of nutrients on the cambium layer, which there's two layers here. You can't probably see it in the camera, but there's two layers. There's the outer bark, and then there's the inner cambium layer. You kind of see it right there. It's kind of a smoother layer of cambium. The cambium has basically two layers to it too also, and it transfers the water and nutrients from the ground up through the tree and up into the needles, branches of the tree, and then they go through the photosynthesis process, and then those nutrients then are transferred down back into the roots, feeding the tree too. So it's a two-way route of water and nutrients.
Is that the xylem and the phloem?
Xylem and phloem, exactly, right. And so then they keep the tree fed and healthy. If you interrupt that, it'll die. So the traditional ecological knowledge of our elders will say you just take enough bark off of a tree for one bark basket. And in my, I do have in my PowerPoint, I do have some photos of some of those trees that were scarred. If we want to, well, maybe I don't. That was actually a cambium field for food. But those, they're still living out there. I've recorded cedar trees that had large or pieces of bark taken from it. The tree is still living and still growing. So yeah, form and function. Now let's get back to that. If you put a lot of berries and huckleberries in there, if you let's contrast that with a pail, like a coffee can pail. The sides are square. I mean they're straight. So the weight of the berries on the top usually can squish berries down below, and you'll have berry juice on the bottom of your pail. Well, the form of the basket here with these angled walls of the basket, they help to hold the berries up, and so that all the weight isn't coming down and smashing the berries down below. So form and function, this is a really this works really well for berry picking, because it's not going to squish your berries down here. You're going to lose your juices out of there, because you want the juice, when you dry the berries, you want that juice in there and just the water to escape out of it and keep the nutrients in that berry. So yeah, I'm going to show you a couple of more different baskets here that I've made too, that have a little bit different form to it too. But this is your traditional Salish berry basket right here, the single fold basket, small enough that you can harvest your berries, and then you would take your berries back to maybe a larger container like this. That's okay. And then you can take when this berry basket is full of berries, then you can dump them in there and then continue to go on berry picking. But of course, then if you get that much volume of berries, you're probably going to squish some berries in there. But this is another design of a basket here. As you can see, it doesn't have a single fold like this one here. This one has two folds in an elliptical kind of shape, kind of a football shape, kind of scoring of the outside bark, leaving the inside bark intact and not cutting that cambium layer. So when I'm folding, it's all folding on those scored edges on the outer outer part of the bark of the basket. It's a little tricky having to fold it in there, but with some finesse, you can fold it and then drill your holes in the sides. And here, what I have here is then rawhide strips that I would cut and then soak in water, and then I would sew them on the sides to keep the sides together. And then here I have willow, and on the outside and the inside of the brim to support its opening there. And then the rawhide is attached and keeps those hoops of willow in place. And then we have a shoulder strap here made of elk rawhide to carry the basket with me. A lot of times when basket this big were used for storage of any items, clothing, tools, food, and such. And then many times there was a rawhide covering that would be put on the top so that other maybe mice and other animals and insects can't get in there. But I have one in the Montana Historical Society. It's on exhibit there. It's about the half size of this basket, but it's also got a rawhide cover over the top of it. And that basket in that museum is entitled Kootenai Food Storage Basket. Okay.
These are amazing.
Yeah, so this is, here we have another basket here. This is really interesting here. What I've done here too is, as you can see, the front of the basket is lower than the back of the basket. And many times that's there because if you're harvesting things and that lower lip, bringing your arm over and dumping, items that you're collecting in is a lot easier than coming farther up and then dumping. It's just a little bit more efficient way of creating and making a slightly different form of basket. But here we have then an inset right here that helps to cover the seam and supports the edges there. There's a nice solid basket here for good storage basket there. Again, you can kind of see the way it is created that way. Now I'm kind of show you another one.
They just keep getting bigger.
This is really big, yeah. Now, this is kind of the latest transformation of all my baskets. I put a lot of work in this, and this was a whole tree.
For perspective of how big this is, okay, this is huge. Is this the cambium?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, so is this here. This is the cambium strip right there that I just used to kind of cover that seam and to support the ties and binds there a little bit better.
I'll bet if you show this, it might translate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can see some of the layers there. Yeah, it's really
Great.
Incredible.
So there's the cambium. Then the outer bark is right there. It's a darker color.
Yep.
And then we've got a little bit of a cambium strip there.
Oh, wow. So cool in the chat.
Nice. I've gotten permits from tribal forestry when they go in and log areas that are close to the cedar trees. I was able to get a whole log, and so then this is just one log. This is one tree. So the width of the tree is basically the circumference of the tree would be right through here. So I was able to take. So if you can imagine how long this bark was, it was twice this size, the length and the width, and having to work with this size of this, one of the biggest baskets I've made right here.
It's incredible. I'd never seen this basket before. It's incredible. I wish last week we wished we had smell-o-vision, and this week I wish you had. Yeah. So again, let's do the perspective thing.
This could be a backpack.
Yeah. Hold that up to this tippy. Like hold it up to my back, just so you can see how cute this thing is. Yeah.
I could probably carry a little kid in here.
Yeah, easily. Easily. It's impressive.
But yeah, you can nest these baskets pretty much in there too, so that's kind of nice. But I'm gonna make a backpack out of this, I think, and go backpacking with it. Put a cover over the top of it. Would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we have a guest in the room with us, Carolyn Pardini, a former advocacy award recipient, and she has just reiterated how beautiful that these baskets are. We have a couple questions that came up out of this. First of all, never realized the cone shape would not affect the bottom berries. Yep, me neither. I learned that. And what happens if it cracks while making it while using only one strip?
As you can see here, I've got a blowout here. This busted, I packed it too heavy and it came out of there. So, but what I could do is drill some holes and sew that back up. Cedar bark, it'll split pretty easy horizontally. I mean, vertically. You can see there's some splits there, and but it doesn't split horizontally very well because all the grain of the wood, the bark, fibrous material is going vertically. So you have to work with it in that realm with that consideration. Now, does that answer your question on that? I'm sorry.
Does that answer your question of what it happens if using only one strip? I think so.
Okay.
And then we have another question. So would it be stitched in that area? Can you fix it?
Yeah, I can fix this. I can drill some more holes and fix that, or else come all the way across here and drill some holes up in that side there too. So yeah.
I keep thinking there is someone knocking at the door. It's a flicker. We have a flicker visitor as well. And then the other one is, does the curve on the bottom fit? Is it created to fit someone's, frame?
Not necessarily. It's just how when you fold it on those scores, that tends to create that curve there. But what's nice about it is that it fits your leg really nicely too. So if I'm having to use that like that for some reason to put things into, it fits over my thigh really good. And I can like pick stuff and even like branches, like if I'm harvesting some moss or something like that from the trees, I could use this pretty easy, pulling it from the trees and just depositing in there. So I think it works good that way.
It amazes me all of the ergonomics that goes into these very old, patterns that have, the ancestral patterns of these containers.
Yeah, we have continued use of that, of the cedar trees. There's areas in the base of the Mission Mountains where the cedar trees are, and there's a lot of trees with areas where bark is taken out of there.
Oh, another good question. Was this a specific job in the community to make baskets, or is it something that families made themselves, like the digging stick? And was there a season for making baskets?
Very good point. Yes, individual families, usually, there was some specialization in the technologies. A lot of that has to deal more with specialization in some of the stone tools, like making the arrowheads and scrapers and stone knives. Usually they're associated with quarry sites. In the families that lived close to those sources, they became specialized in some of those unique skills. But digging sticks, baskets, and containers, they're fairly universal that every family had. They were creating their own, and then they were and teaching their own kids and such. And so then sometimes certain individual designs and form and function are created by individual families and not necessarily by the tribe as a whole. And so then different designs or different uses or different techniques of construction may be unique to a family or a band. But usually, yeah, they were all creating, they had knowledge of creating most all their technologies within a small family. Just wanted to show you some more applications of this. Kind of shows more of the cambium. Here's the cambium.
That actually fits in well with this next question. Oki Radium, we're excited. He's a teacher in Browning. Would you keep the strips of bark moist like you would when weaving cedar baskets, or do you make the bark baskets with dry bark and cambium?
Yeah, good question. I find the best is to work with it fresh off the tree. A typical harvesting and creation of these bark products would usually start in the morning. I would go out to the site and spend, drive to the site or and find my trees that I want to take bark from. That usually takes the morning, a good 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours. And then when I get back home, then the bark is fresh. I will keep like a tub of water close by to, if I have to take a break for extended amount of time, 2 or 3 hours, I'll put the bark back in that water and it'll keep it moist. But the best part is the best use, or the best way is to use it fresh off the tree. I have tried to dry and store the bark, and I haven't had good luck with it. It'll dry and it'll curl up really real tight. And I've tried to soak that again, but it just didn't have the pliability to it. So you have to work with it straight off the tree.
So the moisture level of the cells has become hydrophobic over time, right? Two questions. Is there a specific time of year to peel the bark to make the baskets?
Very, very good question. So when we talk about the cambium, the phloem, and the xylem, they get active. The water and the nutrients, that happens in the spring. And so one of the cultural bioindicators of trees that the bark is ready to be pulled off of trees is when the trees and the shrubs start budding out. That's an indicator that they are pulling nutrients up from the ground, and that process of photosynthesis is happening. And so then the tree is actively pulling water up, and the cambium actually swells. It swells with the water and nutrients, and then that's the only time that you can really kind of get the bark off, through early spring onto midsummer, late summer, when it's starting to drying out. It's hard to get that. The cambium will then shrink up, and it's hard to get the bark off. And usually you will compromise the bark, and it's just not worth it, because you'll harm the tree, and the bark you get off there won't be of standard to make anything with. So springtime, that is appropriate time for peeling the bark off of trees. Also getting your, it was a tradition to get teepee poles that are made of lodgepole in the spring too. Because of that effort, you could just, you didn't have to have a scraping tool. You could just pull it right off of the lodgepole because of that. And then also you made lodgepole berry basket too. So not only were you working with cedar, but there was lodgepole, Engelmann spruce, white pine bark, even Rocky Mountain maple. If you can get that big enough, the bark will come off really nicely in the spring. And also this digging sticks too. So if you're making digging sticks in the spring, that's an ideal time that the bark will just come right off too, and you get a smooth, nice finish on your wood and such. And you don't have to use a lot of labor to cut or scrape the bark off of that.
As you're holding that, it is striking me as such a, holding vessel. Could that be used as a bowl, like for soup? Or is there a way to like make it dried so that it does work for liquids? This
actually, I was, Vernon Finley pointed out, he gave me an old photograph from the Smithsonian featuring this dish, and what it was entitled Kootenai food dish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so as we're talking about, here's the bark, and then on the ends of this rectangular piece of bark, I cut off the outside and left the cambium. So this is cambium here, of course, distributed through the other area, and just left that as supportive, the outer bark to support the bowl as it is. And so this is, you can put soup in here, it'll hold fluids because there's no holes. There's a few cracks in the cambium there, but it's not all the way through. So I could put water, I could put soup in here.
Wow.
And so then it was a food dish used normally. And then there was also spoons made of the bark that you could use to spoon it up. and eat it with. So, and then it's tied here. So when this cambium is very flexible, you can fold it and then tie it with the dogbane cordage, and it'll dry in that shape, stay in that shape.
And we will talk about dogbane.
Yes.
But just not yet. Let's stay in the springtime for now.
Right. So this here is here's one of those examples of one of those spoons. And again, this is all the cambium up here, and then the cambium end bark is at the bottom there, and creating your spoon shape. So this will be a big ladle if you needed to, like say if this was, you know, you could ladle out if this was a pot of some sort.
Yeah, you're going to need to talk about that one now, because again, beautiful. It's incredible.
So this is, I you know, looking at, I study a lot of historic photos and museum items. And this was there was an old photo of a cedar box that was made, and then it was sewed together with rawhide here to create a square like box. And then in here, I do have other food samples that we'll talk about later on. That's cambium there. That would be fun to talk about. And maybe, you know, when I get to the cambium, I'll show some photos.
Awesome. Okay.
But yeah, this is a nice little box. Big boxes with what cedar was made too, for this to store food in.
What would be done with baskets that were damaged beyond repair, either during the creation process or after long use?
Probably burnt. Probably just, yeah, used for firewood possibly, if you couldn't use it for anything else. I have, so the grain of this cedar is going this way. If it's split, I might just take off the top of it and create a tray out of it or something like that. So if it splits in the right area, I might be able to salvage some of this and create another tray or another small box with it or something like that. It could possibly, depending on how it was compromised, you could recycle it to a certain degree to make it something else.
So one of the things that came up a lot in our Ethnobotany webinars over that series was the honorable harvest and respecting plant relatives as we're harvesting. Do you have a specific practice that you have to harvest?
Yes, we do that, and a lot of times I will share this with my students too. And we go out and we're sampling plants or harvesting plants. We do it as a group. We gather around the plant. We acknowledge the plant. We talk to the plant. We tell them our intentions of what our intentions to use this plant for, and how it is to teach our youth and to teach our tribal members about this, and that we have deep respect for the plant. We also will offer a gift. Reciprocity, we'll offer a gift to the plant. Many times in this historic period, tobacco was used, but the elders have talked about giving of something that's dear to you. And so in the old days, sometimes matches were really important to the people, and sometimes they would offer matches, or they would offer even sometimes money to the plant. Tobacco, or like dried meat, maybe some foods that are really important to the people too. What was offered to that plant was actually given and left with the plant. And then sometimes prayers and songs were also offered to that plant. There are songs that are specific to certain plants and harvesting, the act of harvesting plants. So the acknowledgement and your intention is very important. In the indigenous worldviews, inanimate objects are alive. So all of these things are alive to us. The trees, the rocks, the wind, the rain, they're all alive. They have a consciousness. They have their presence, their energy. There's an energy transfer when you're out there in the natural world, and when you're working with these materials. These traditional materials, I do believe that there's actually an energy transfer. And I'll get into talking about willow a little bit later on in our presentation here. with my fish trap and working with Willow. We'll talk a little bit more deeper about that.
So I have to say, when we first met, which was what, 12, 13 years ago now, Tim was giving a cultural presentation and talked about rocks as having spirits. And that was a lot of my unpacking my Western science bias. And it took me a while, but then, just coming up to river honoring and learning from so many people up here, it's really been transformational to me to understand the connection between all things. And someone commented even, that's interesting, we should be more like that today. I like the acknowledgements towards the plants, and we should be all like that with all of us, with all the things. And somebody said, where did the tobacco come from?
Oh, yeah, well, that was introduced to the Northwest here, because we didn't have tobacco in this area. So it's kind of interesting. It starts in the Americas, down South America or so, and then goes over to Europe, and then comes back over to us as in trade goods, and how that had started as a tradition with our ancestors and stuff like that. It to a certain degree, tobacco was kind of a bit mind altering in a way in those days, and it helped to facilitate that spiritual connection that my ancestors and all of our ancestors were participating in. Even wine, as in Catholicism. Beer, it's considered that beer had saved the world to a certain degree. Beer was used to make the pyramids. That's how they kept I suppose it was slave labor to a certain degree happy. And European water that wasn't good to drink, they were drinking beer to a certain degree. So tobacco, yeah, and nowadays, tobacco has some ill effects on our people. And so our elders are really promoting to use other things for that gift, to give to the plants and other people, and to help our youth to kind of abstain from tobacco, and our adults too. I've got a history of smoking tobacco and realizing the benefits, but also the drawbacks of tobacco too. So there are other things that we can offer in a respect of giving back. So I like that. So I teach that, and other individuals will. One thing we do too is offer a gift. There's also smudging. We will actually do some smudging on site of burning of either sage, sweetgrass, or juniper. And juniper is one material that's a smudge that's pretty specific to the Intermountain tribes here, and their use with that juniper as a smudge, as a cleanse yourself, and to help to transfer those prayers to the Creator or to those other beings that you're praying to or praying with. So like Jennifer was talking about, I use this example with my students that rocks, as an inanimate object, this is a piece of chert material that was traditionally used in Montana, Western Montana, for making stone tools. And when we look at rocks, we don't look at them as being conscious individuals that they're alive. But if we look at the molecular structure of everything around us, not just the rock, but us and the rocks and things that they're made of atoms. They're made of neutrons and protons make up an atom, and you got that neutron, you got those atoms moving around. I mean, they're vibrating. They're actively moving. We don't see that, but there's energy in that. That's vibrating. This rock is probably vibrating. We don't even know it because we don't have that sensitivity to it. And that vibration is maybe how it's talking to us. And that vibration is also a sign of transfer of energy between us. The very fact of the vision quest is based on that transfer of energy of you being present and having that good intentions and respect for those beings only helps to facilitate that transfer of energy through your intentions. When the elders were kind of teaching me in my ways of approaching these beings, is that you have good intentions with you. When you harvest, you have good intentions, and they see that in you, and they see the respect you have for these, and they'll give themselves to you for that. It's something I use in my wilderness survival classes. Is that before you walk out into those woods or those areas, those natural areas, that you have good intentions and respect for all beings out there. Even the Salish have stories of rocks that there's a story down in the Bitterroot. We're getting a little close. We're out of the coyote story telling, so I won't cover that right now because that's, as a tradition, we don't tell those stories out of the winter months.
Or what happens?
Or what happens?
The snakes.
Yeah, the snakes. As one elderly man told me, was that be careful if you tell coyote stories out of the winter season. One way is that the snakes will come visit you, but they'll visit you when you're in an uncompromising position, trying to relieve yourself out in the woods. So be careful. That's one reason. And then another reason why you shouldn't be telling stories outside of the winter, because spring, summer, and fall, you're supposed to be busy gathering and hunting and fishing and making your tools and all this stuff, not standing around telling stories, but preparing yourself. All those 3 months, you're preparing yourself to make it through winter. And so it keeps you productive.
Was part of that productivity and preparation because the children would be inside the lodges as well?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, I grew up with
indoor recess.
2 older brothers and 2 sisters, and you know how that can get. I mean, especially in close proximity in a teepee, for you storms and stuff like that, you're going to be in that teepee for maybe days on end possibly. And to keep peace and entertaining the youth and such, those stories were really important for that. I mean, not only for that, but also to pass on the ways of being, the way that children should be honorably within the community, and other life lessons are played out through those stories there, and entertainment. So keep the kids happy so they're not fighting, right?
It's indoor recess in a whole new level. Yeah. I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of activity during the wintertime too to be doing and addressing, but that's the kind of general norm of that. So wonderful. Yeah.
What about rocks? And since we're on rocks, what about Julie Kajun taught me this when we went out to Finley Point a couple of years ago, and there are rocks with a very specific, delineation of a material difference, and so there's almost like a circle around it or a very stripe. Is there something to that? The spirit is a spirit rock.
You're talking about natural stripes or
yep.
In a rock. Well, yes and no. That could be specific to Julie, maybe, and her connection with the rock and what those rocks maybe symbolize or so. I know that on a science level, that's that's stratified rock. That's layered rock. As in, it used to be sedimentary, and then if it's welded together pretty good, then probably looking at a metamorphic process after that sedimentary material was in heat pressure welded those layers together really well. What we have around here on the geological scale, we have cyanobacteria, fossilized cyanobacteria. I mean, it's in the bedrock around here. It's right up in the back of my house. And that's
Cyano is yellow, right? Yellow or red?
Yes, I think that refers to that for sure. But it's the oldest life form on Earth. It is like 3 billion years old. It is that old, and it creates. Now they're still living in Australia. They're pillared.
The stromatolites.
Yeah, stromatolites. Correct, and it's living in a shallow sea there. And so what happens is the waves wash over the top of that. Now they're a little thin biomat of cyanobacteria, and it spreads out over the top of a surface of whatever it's inhabiting. Shallow seas wash sediment and other nutrients over the top of that, and those biomats grow, and they grow on layers upon layers upon layers. So it's also sedimentary, but it's also very, it's got organic material in there that it's forming and shaping it over billions of years, or hundreds, millions of years. It's creating. I think by my house, that's got to be at least 50 to maybe even 100 feet thick layers of the cyanobacteria, and that is also what the Mars rover is looking for on Mars, is cyanobacteria. So it's amazing. We have this really old life form right in our backyard here, and that sometimes has layers in it, and sometimes it doesn't even. Sometimes it breaks out of that and it creates waves and other different layers of that cyanobacteria that maybe through the metamorphic process, manipulated that a bit, but I'm not sure.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. All right. What's next, Tim? You've got some more baskets, I noticed, like your little willow basket, and then you've got these really cool things over here.
Sure.
They're really big things.
We can move into willow. So this is another. It's kind of a joke in my class because I have talked about my relationship with willow. I had one student asked me. He said, "Now, have you told your wife about your relationship with willow?" But I really do. I'll have to back up a little bit with kind of my my upbringing, my personal growth and my connection with the natural world around me. And it started out at a very young age. I was, 10, 11, 12, I was out in the woods a lot by myself. And I grew up with Rattlesnake Creek. That's my front yard, and then Mountain Jumbo is my backyard. Excuse me. So I was always out, and then my grandma from St. Ignatius, where my mother's family come from, where I get my Salish Kootenai College blood. I came in from the creek one time, and I come home, and my grandma says, "Oh, grandson, you should come over here. Come here. I want to talk to you." And so then I sat with her, and she says, I noticed you like to be out in the woods by yourself a lot. I go, "Yeah, I do. I have fun." So she says, "Well, I want you to be aware of everything around you. I want you to be really aware if something starts to come talk to you," she says, "because that's really important. That's really important for your sumesh." She called that Salish word for your personal medicine, or for yourself. It is somewhat similar to like the Vision Quest, is basically what she was kind of talking about. Because in the Vision Quest, as a young man or a young woman, they'd send you up into areas isolated into these natural areas, the woods or so, and you basically that is where you got your vision and your connection with your spirit helper that would then give you a song, give you ways of helping yourself and helping the community and such. So in a way, that's that energy transfer then too, from those beings out there communicating with you and teaching you things. The consideration that these animals were here long before us, that they have experience on this earth long before us, they can tell us a lot, they can teach us a lot because they were here. And that falls in line with respecting elders. You respect your elders, a tradition in most indigenous peoples, because even if it's your brother who is only a couple of years older, he still has been on this earth longer than you have, and he's learned more. He can teach you things. So the animals, in some ways, are the same way to them, and other beings, bees, even the rain. You can communicate. The rain or the wind can be those spirit entities that would help you to gain your medicine, who you are, to help you through your life. Okay, so get back to what my grandmother was telling me. She said, you listen, you be brave, and if something starts to come talk to you, you listen, be a part of that, because that's a very important time in your life. So then when I go out in the woods, then it was almost like, uh-oh, things are going to start talking to me. Oh my God. So kind of a different feeling as I went back in the woods, but it didn't stop me. I still continued my connection with the world, so much that in Boy Scouts, I was the kid, I was that young boy that was always finding the cool stuff, like fossils, crystals, feathers, just the cool stuff, you know, that all the other boys wanted to find too. And so they couldn't figure out how come I was picking up on a lot of these things out in the natural world. And so much that also transferred to a lot of my archaeological work that I did for the tribe, that I was the one that was finding the artifacts a lot. So I don't know how to really articulate that connection, but it was happening, and it still happens to me. So I think it's something that anyone can cultivate in that. And so then this is a long story, getting back to my relationship to willow. When I visualize some of the items I'm making, I actually feel that the plants that I'm thinking about, I'm already connecting with them. And so then they're helping to lead me to them. And usually I'm very successful in finding the plants or the materials I need. It's not just any kind of willow too. The willow that has to grow in a certain area is what I'm looking for. And sometimes that willow is affected by other beings, like animals and such. Even an elk browsing on some of the shrubs tends to make the willow grow a different way. And so then I have like some of the fish spears. It's got a fork that comes off the shaft, and it's got these spikes that come in there. And when the deer browse on, they create that forked branch that comes off, kind of balanced like that. And I cut that off, and I attach that onto a shaft and make my fish spears with that. So then I thank the elk and the deer for their browsing on some of those plants. This might be a good time to maybe talk about the fish trap.
When is willow harvested?
Oh, willow can, it can be, it depends. If you want the bark off, then it's good time to harvest it in the spring. Also, before the leaves come out, like if I'm looking for a specific width and thickness, and I don't mind having the bark on there, then early before the leaves come out, I can kind of see all the branches, and the leaves aren't hiding the inner branches. And sometimes I'll pick the certain ones, I'll cut the certain ones out through there. So that's an ideal time to find the correct pieces that I need, and uniform pieces of willow, like for a willow backrest. For this basket, this is the small fine shoots that come up after an animal comes through, like beaver, or even browsing animals. They'll come in and they'll eat off of the willow all the way down to the ground, basically, and then they start to grow. The nice new shoots that come off there are really nice to use for these small baskets, and they're really thin. And in the spring, of course, again, we have the cambium layer also in the bark of the willow that's carrying all the nutrients in the water through there, which really makes it really nice and flexible, more flexible than in the fall or the winter. So springtime is a good time, but for other willow products that I don't mind having the bark on, then I can usually harvest it most year round. But in the springtime, it's probably the most flexible to create the baskets as this one here, especially when you're kind of pulling it around that.
Is there a specific use for that basket?
Not really.
It's just pretty.
Yeah, I kind of went on the creative process. I just started creating them when I came up here. I didn't fully visualize this basket. It was kind of like I just started weaving it, and I kind of made it on its own. Maybe it was telling me how it wanted to be formed and shaped. I don't know, but it was a fun process.
So one thing I think I'm hearing is that knowledge transmission is a really huge part of traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge systems, but it doesn't have to be from an elder to a younger person, or it can be from the relatives in the environment, the plants, the animals, the rocks, even, that can, if you're open, that can be a teacher.
Yes, great example. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it form and function, the print, how willow works, how it flexes. When you start working with these, you get to know how the materials react to your action reaction, and your mind body follows within sync with that. So I don't try to torture the material. When I get to know oh, this is a flexible piece. Oh, this bends really well and moves through there. I think I'm working with the plant rather than forcing the plant to do something it doesn't want to do. When you put different elements together like this, we have wood, we have bone, and then we have tree pitch and ground up charcoal that's part of this here too. When you start intermixing these different materials with different properties, they can react to heat and cold differently, expansion, contraction with heat and cold, and sometimes these things can crack or break because of that pressure or stress from nature and that. So getting to know how these materials work on their own and how they work together is a process. It's a process that you just can't read about. It's a process you have to experience, and that experience is what, in the indigenous worldview, experience is regarded higher than a person who experienced it through a story. The person who's telling the story has experienced that. That is more powerful than the person that has read something about that has read, well, this is what I've heard, or this is what I read. The people listening to you, and indigenous people, would say, well, okay, but that person that really made it and experienced that, that's the person that they're going to really believe in, embrace that knowledge more than, I guess, a book smart person.
So there's information gathering and there's actual knowledge transmission where it becomes intrinsic and part of your being when you've experienced it.
Correct. And mind and body remembers those things, and they follow suit with that. The more proficient you are, in making your tools, how automatically that is. That, okay, I know just how to carve certain wood that has a certain grain going the right way, and you work with that. You work with the materials at hand and how they react. So that's, yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, show us your weirs. Another small creation.
This is I don't know if some of that, I've been in schools and I've presented on this.
Point it towards me and they can see that. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yep, that's
yeah.
it.
So this is a traditional willow fish trap made of only two plants, sandbar willow and the dogbane cordage. and what's really nice is they grow pretty much in the same environments. If you think about a wetland, in the water, the cattails and the bulrush are growing. And as you move inland, you're going to get to the willows that are right on the shoreline. And then right after the willows, you're going to get the dogbane growing kind of a little bit more in the drier, not quite in the wetlands of cattails and the bulrush. So this is sandbar willow. And I have to thank Squillow. Squillow is beaver. So I thank beaver for helping me make my fish traps. Can anybody guess how beaver helps me with my fish traps? Anybody, any thoughts there? You know, he doesn't actually help me put it together, but
Structure of a dam?
to make, okay, for a structure of the dam. Oh, yes, then create an environment that might be conducive to the willow.
Yep.
Very good. I like that.
Do they gather it for you?
Nope. They take it from me, actually.
Beaver removes other trees that give rise. Oops, too many are coming up. Beaver removes other trees that give rise to more willow.
Oh, nice. That's a good one too. I didn't consider that. Yeah.
Or by cutting down trees and having suckers come up.
Oh, that's perfect. That's it right there.
Ding, 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 ding for the win. Provide guidance, ideas.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that participation. That was really good. Yeah, beaver promotes those shoots from growing because the roots of the willow are still there. The next year, those nice long shoots come up, and I get my the ribs from beaver. So I come into an area and I find that beavers just mowed down all the willow in this one patch, and I go, lum squillow. Thank you for helping me with my squillow. And so basically, I'm thanking beaver for helping me make my fish traps. I can't get any willow from those patches at that time, but it takes another like 2 or 3 years for this willow to mature with these nice long straight runners that doesn't have a lot of branches on them. And so then after about 2 or 3 years, I'll come back to that patch, and then I'll get these nice runners. And then the hoops in here, I'll shape them also, and then cut the smaller little inner cone there. But but I got a wonderful story, kind of a wonderful story of discovery of my connection to the willow. So the first time I made this willow fish trap, I made a number of them, and I have a few in museums, and even a private individual bought one. He's back in Philadelphia, where he displays that in his home. So my first willow fish trap, I had to make a lot of string from the dogbane plant that grows near the willow. So I spent 3 or 4 weeks off and on during the days making the spetsen or rope. So I made that, then I went down to the river and I harvested all my willow. And then I put it together. So I tied and bound it together, and it was looking just like this. I was like, wow, that looks really good. I really like this fish trap. So then I proceeded to do some presentations in schools and things. And I noticed after about 2 or 3 months, it started to get really floppy on me and it started to fall apart. And I was like, oh God, what's going on here? Did my ties and binding, did the string stretch or what? And so I was a little frustrated. So I sat there with my trap, and I talked to the trap. I said, you know, what did I do wrong here? How come you're falling apart on me? And in my closer observation, I started to look at the willow, and I saw the bark was more wrinkly than before. It wasn't as smooth, and I thought, wow. And I said, you know, the willow looks like it's shrunk a bit. It's a little skinny. You know, it's not like what it used to be. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And then it's like, oh, you know, it shrunk because the water escaped from it. It dehydrated, right? So the willow, all the willow shrunk on me, and all the ties and bindings came loose. So I'm thinking there, wow. And I felt very humble about it. I thought, whoa, okay. I thought I, you know, had it down. I thought I just put it together and it'd be just fine. Well, when I started thinking about it, I thought, okay, Willow taught me how to work with it. Willow communicated to me that no, you can't put me together with fresh green willow. Still has water in it. Still has that volume of the water in it. And when it dried out, it shrunk up. So it's like, oh, wow. So I attributed that willow taught me how to work with it. And so then I thought about that. I said, oh, that's what my ancestors, how they approached that too. That is that willow, that was that relationship that my ancestors had to it, because willow talked to me, it told me what I did wrong. Now, that's an indigenous worldview. If we look at a Western worldview, it would be, oh, I figured that out. Willow didn't talk to me. It would be my ego. It would be like, no, willow is just a material I worked with, right? But no, Western worldview would say, no, it'd be the ego. No, I figured this out. Yeah, no, I figured it out. Yeah. It's willow. That's why I say I have a relationship with willow, because willow has taught me how to work with it. So that's kind of the joke in my class. Alfred Woodcock, he'll laugh at me, but every time I start talking about willow, he'll say, now does your wife know you have a relationship with willow? Anyway, yeah, it kind of looks like a fish too, in a way, you know. There's the mouth, here's the tail. Any questions about, comments on that? So I have to shape my hoops, and I have to bind my runners or my ribs of the fish trap together in a bundle, and I put them away for 3 months. And I'll make my hoops and I'll put them away for 3 months, and I won't even think about it until and then during that time I'll work on my cordage to put it together. And then when I'm ready to go, the willow's ready to go and it's all stable. And so I learned that the hard way, but thanks to Willow for teaching me how to work.
Your story demonstrates humility and humbleness. How would one remove the fish once caught?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. You know, some of the kids that I like at the river on, they'll put their arm. Do you do it this way? Do you just go and grab it? No, you get your hand stuck in there. And so I make a joke about, yeah, you get your hand stuck in there, and then I got to cut your arm off. Jeez, you know. And their eyes go big and stuff like that. But yes, see the back, this here back part. This is where I can undo the willow right here, and then I can get when the willow fish trap gets full, I can then untie that, and then the willows open up, and then I get a basket, and then I can just dump the fish in there, because those willows will open up and the fish will dump out. That's how you can do
again, like a simple machine with leverage and ingenuity. And how long do you think fish weirs such as that have been used? Do you have any idea?
Boy, you know, I don't have any idea how long, although there are place names in Montana, western Montana, that refers to the use of fish traps. Up in Dayton Creek, which is north of here, a low stream that dumps into, yeah. Here's a. Yeah, we
Oh, by the way, someone would have just stuck their hand in the opening.
Oh, okay. Oh, no. Where's my knife?
So Dawson,
I don't see the
Or Dayton.
specific place names on here, this place name map, but down in the Big Hole Valley, on the Wise River,
oh,
Big Hole
yeah,
River,
we went there.
there's an area called Fish Trap. And what I'm thinking is that that's a historic place name identified by the settlers of that area, observing our Bitterroot Salish people using fish traps in this area. And there's a photo of me and that I have of me and Louis Adams down there when we're doing some work. Elder interviews with him, and we're at the fish trap area, and I'm looking at the river, and this is a unique area, part of the river, because it gets more shallow, and there's all these rocks around there that you could use to put the fish trap in, and then divert with rock like a wall or dam that to divert the fish in the fish trap. And so, and no other area is kind of like that. It gets a little bit deeper on both sides of that site. So I think that was used by my ancestors there. Then farther up north, along the Flathead Lake, near Elmo, or north of Elmo, is Dayton area. This is called Dayton Creek, and the Kootenai name for that refers to the use of fish traps on Dayton Creek. The Kalispet or the Kalispels or Ponderay people probably had a nickname by other tribes as the fish trap people because of all the waterways and all the streams that are within their homelands. More so than the Bitterroot Salish, I would even say, but I think that fish traps were used year round. If we talk about certain political and more modern day aspects of that, the water rights that the tribe has negotiated with the state of Montana, basically those water rights were supported by our use of fishing, or the waterways, by fishing year round. We were always depending on fishing. If big game was scarce in areas, we could always rely on fishing. Wherever we set up a camp, there was always fishing going on during the day, people hunting, but fishing was most, we depended on that year round. And so with just that traditional use of that is what helped us win our water rights with the state of Montana, basically the negotiation of that. So yeah, fish traps, they're fun. They're a lot of fun. I'm not going to get into the cordage quite yet. I'm going to finish off with some willow. Here's a bigger kind of willow basket for storage, for collecting things. Well, one of the elderly women said a basket like this was sometimes good for collecting the tree lichen or the moss when they were. She said, and she remembers her grandmother in the Swan Valley. They would take these sticks like a lodgepole, and they would put another stick on the top of it, tie it onto a small one that crossed over the long pole, and they used to go up into the trees and pull this lichens down. Or a lot of people call this a moss, a black moss, but it's actually a lichen. And then they would pull it down and then put it in large baskets like this, fill it up with this lichen, and then take it back and clean it and then use it for food and for other things. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on. It's one of my favorite plants here, right there. But we'll catch up with that. But this is a willow, really basic weaving function here, and a collection basket, storage basket also. It's a little rough. I'm not the best basket maker. I'm just kind of, but they're just a little
Humility
rough
in action.
So these are fun baskets to have around. They're fairly easy and quick baskets to make. Okay, let's go to this basket. This kind of looks like a fish trap or a fish weir, but what this is a burden basket. And does that freeze on their side too?
You know, it might be my fault because I'm adding things to the resources, but no, you're
Okay.
not frozen here.
Well, that's all right. They can still see it.
Yeah, you're not frozen here. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a burden basket. This is a big one. This is probably more my size. Most of the burden baskets that I have or researched are probably about half this size. But since how tall I am, I thought, and I had the willow already that length, I said, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna make it a big, big burden basket. So burden basket is just basically used to carry anything and everything, you know, especially if you're moving camp. If I'm going out and gathering firewood, I put firewood in here. I can haul it with this. A strap. I should put a tump line on here because then I could put this on the back, and then I could run the tump line around my forehead.
Oh.
And then carry it that way, or straps.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed a question. I'm sorry. With the fish trap opening face upstream or downstream?
Okay, it was faced upstream. That's I didn't cover that. Right. Let's do that real quick. So the traditional ecological knowledge of the elders was like, well, the cutthroat and the bull trout, when they spawn, they're leaving larger bodies of water to go into the small feeder streams of lakes and rivers. And so they go up in the small feeder streams and they go higher up up to the clean gravels that are up in that that are up there, and to lay their eggs, because they need the clean gravels and they don't even need a lot of sediment and a lot of to cover the eggs. So they go up in the small feeder streams farther up. So that's why it's important for logging roads to either be removed or engineered so it doesn't, a lot of sediment doesn't get into our streams up there and suffocates the eggs. So the fish leave the big water, goes up the streams, and then after they start coming down, after pretty much, you know, it's a big event. And so they're going in groups. They're going in the groups, and so then there's the critical mass eventually is going to start heading down back into the bigger bodies of water. So then that's where you're going to place your fish trap. It's going to be upstream. So the fish are going to be coming down. They've already laid their eggs, because if we put the fish trap in before they lay their eggs, then that's counter to what we want. You know, that's not sustainable. So they're coming down, and a lot of times I've watched this, that the fish will not go in there automatically. They're going to see that, and they're going to be hesitant. They're going to be wary of that. And so they're going to school around the front of the fish. There's going to be a rock weir or a willow fence line that's going to keep them from going around the trap. And so then in my demonstration at river honoring, I have the children go behind the fish, and you know, kids, when they get in the water, they're going to get rowdy. They're going to start splashing around. And that's going to get the fish going. The fish are going to say, wow, look, maybe if I take a chance and go through that hole, it's usually like one fish goes in and then the other ones go, okay, I'm going to go for it. And so they start going in there, and then they fill up the fish trap. And then that's when we call off the kids to get out of the stream. They get out of the stream, and then you pick up the fish trap and then dump them out. So that's that was a good question. Thank you for that question.
And no fish get harmed in the process because they're laminated.
Well, I forgot my fish. Yeah. My laminated fish.
I have some great pictures of that, but unfortunately they have children's faces in them, so I can't share them. But it's always fun to watch Tim do that at river honoring.
Yeah, if at all, if you ever get a chance to visit that, that's a lot of fun. And I'm there just about every year. Pandemic hit, and they had to cancel it every now and then.
It's messed up my seasonal round.
Yeah, your personal seasonal round.
My personal seasonal round.
So I've, you know, this is willow, sandbar willow again, and I had to create the hoops again. I learned from my fish trap. I learned from willow that you have to dry these out. So I dried them out for a good 3 months before I put it together. Now this is put together with deer rawhide. And so it's tied with nothing but that. And it's really solid. I mean, but it has some give to it. It can move, it can shift a little bit. Like if you're carrying this, or carrying it even on a horse, and it bumps into a tree, it has some flexibility. It's not going to break on you. It has a flexibility to move around a little bit. And that deer rawhide has a bit of flexibility to it too. You can stretch a bit. I've carried I think it's first or second grader I carried in the back of this one time. And then I can trap them too. So I was able to trap a couple of kids like this by putting it over there. But yeah, you can see the open weave. You know, I had this set up so I could put some stuff down the bottom. Then I've got this other basket there I could put in other items, and maybe I could put another on top of there. And there we go. I got areas there to put stuff there, hides and all sorts of stuff. So you can consider it kind of like a backpack, right? Yeah.
That's awesome.
A lot of fun. Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The time is going by fast.
It is, but and like I said, you always have so much incredible knowledge to share, and there's still so much. There's lichen and moss
Oh, man, there is.
seeds and dog bane and
Oh my gosh.
drying racks.
Well, this is kind of nice. This is we're still on the subject of willow. And this is a nice little model miniature of a drying rack. And we actually have dry meat on here, deer meat. I did this, we have drying racks near my classroom, and we, every now and then, the students, I get them involved with drying meat. And so then we, and that's on a modern metal fabricated racks. And so then I every now and then I'll make a full size of this, and we'll dry meat on this. But this is nothing but willow and rawhide here. It's nice and solid. As long as your materials are stabilized, dried, and things like that, it will last for a long time. But you normally build a fire here, not a real hot fire, but you one that you have a lot of smoke and heat, and some heat to go around the meat drying. That's kind of neat. That's a real typical Salish Kootenai College drying racks, something like that. Okay, there's a lot of other plants I want to talk about too. Talk about drying racks. Okay, let's bring this in. This is a cattail mat that I wove.
Oh.
And these are berries. These are hawthorn berries here right now. But cattail mats, this cattail mat is used as a berry drying rack. There's usually, you can put 2 sticks down like that, and you can put the mat down. Whoops, okay.
That's okay. Let me see if I can just do that a little bit. There we go.
Yeah. So here's, so the cattail mat has little square holes in it. It's got a kind of variegated surface so that when you put berries on there, it helps to circulate the air around those berries and to dry them. So this is a simple rack. Here's, putting the sticks underneath there. So it lifts up the rack so that the air can float around it. And these berries were dried on this cattail mat or drying rack. Another type of drying
and
surface.
They don't roll up.
And they don't roll up. Yeah, good point.
Well, except for the jumpers.
Yeah. So yeah, cattail, that's a lot of fun too. I mean, I get youth, grade school kids making this, and they don't want to stop. They just keep on weaving. these mats together.
So there are a lot of wetlands where cattails grow and marshlands around Montana. Is it okay for anyone to harvest cattails if they wanted to do this for their classroom?
You know, I feel comfortable with a lot of people gathering the cattails because it's perennial. It'll come up the next year. And as long as you're not compromising habitat for like ducks and other animals that are in those
Red-winged
wetlands.
blackbirds.
Yeah. Muskrats, they like building their homes with bulrush and cattail. So I always kind of, tell my students, just be careful going through, look at the areas that you're going so you're not compromising other animals.
So while this is about 7-8 inches square, maybe you could do a smaller square with students to use less resources.
Yes, and we do. And yes, exactly. We do that too. They usually make about half the size of that.
How long would it take to weave something like that?
It usually takes, well, okay, so the process is that you would gather cattail green from the wetland, and you have to dry it out first, because if you put it together with green cattail, here we go again, with willow, it's got a volume of water in it, and it creates a thicker leaf, and so then when it dries, then it shrinks up more. And then this mat actually has too big of squares in it. Then it's too loose.
Oh.
So then what I do is I gather it and then dry it, and then when I want to use it, then I soak the cattails in water for at least 2 or 3 hours, and then that gets it pliable again. And then you can fold it and shape it into just about any kind of shape. Then. And
cattails can be edible, and then the flower?
Yeah.
Can be used.
Yeah, this is the flower, the cattail down after it's dried and mature. To eat the cattail head or the flower, you have to get it when it's really young. But don't get it when it's later, or else you'll just have a mouthful of this.
But that can be used as an absorbent material for like feminine products and diapers and even moccasin insulation.
Yes. In my wilderness survival classes, I talk about, I said, if you're in a situation where you're cold and you can layer this stuff inside of your clothing, you can see it flying around here, but as long as it's dry. If it's wet, then that's not going to work very well. But very, very good. Yeah. Diapers too for babies. Works good for that. Very absorbent. And for my for my fire kit,
oh yeah, I've seen
I use that. Now here's a unique little tool here. This is a container made from elderberry. So if you're familiar with the elderberry shrub there, you'll know that some of that new growth that comes up has a soft center in it. And you can hollow out that soft center. You can take that softer inner wood and you can ream it out with a stick. And so what I've done is made a container for my bow drill fire kit. If I untie this buckskin tie there, then I've got this rawhide cap I can pull off. And on this side, I have the cattail down. This is for my tinder bundle for my bow drill or fire by friction kit. This end, I got cattail down. And then on this other end, I have shredded cedar bark. This keeps it dry and ready for my tinder bundle. And so then there is the shredded cedar bark in there. So there's kind of 2 different tinders, a really fine tinder with the cattail down, and then a little bit more coarser tinder with the shredded cedar bark there.
And what is the container made of again?
The container is made of elderberry.
Elderberry
Branches, yes.
Wow.
And usually you look for the new shoots of elderberry branch that comes up, because that has the thinner walls. Okay. And you can, and it's the softer center there that you can take a stick and you can actually kind of gouge it out.
Oh, okay.
And pull it out there, yeah.
And is that material useful for anything after you remove it?
The inner part, no, I think you probably use it for tinder. Yeah.
Oh, this, Can you use cattails in the same way as making tule mats like other plateau people? I am Yakima and made tule mats with my second graders and cedar cordage with my third graders with help from my mom. I'd like to try to make some with my high school students, high schoolers, with plants we can harvest around the school. We have cattails and red willow.
Okay,
This is browning, by the way. So
nice. Okay, the yeah, bulrush itself, yeah, making the mats, you would use the bulrush itself, but you can use the inner stem of that cattail stalk. They use that okay, so, and the bulrush is fairly soft and it can be brittle to a certain degree. So what they would do is take the cattail stalk with the flower head. It's kind of a woody, a harder, rigid woody. Then you have the leaves of the cattail that come off. That's what you make your mat with. But the center of that, you can then, like every 2 or 3 feet of your bulrush mat, you put one of those cattail rods in there, and it helps to support it better. So I would say no. I would say yes, you can use cattail, but you only use them like every 2 to 4 feet within your bulrush mat. So you're using bulrushes through the whole majority of your mats there. So yeah, that's what you use. I saw one person use cattail stalks for that, and they're kind of hard to sew the cordage through them. The bulrush is a lot easier to go through. So sometimes they would just tie around that cattail stalk.
Oh, interesting.
Before those. Yeah. On the same lines of the cattail down, I kind of wanted to talk about the tree lichen. Fremonte, I can't remember the Latin, I'm sorry.
Is Rose still on here?
Yeah, where's Rose? Yeah. Rose
I can't look it up.
So this is a wonderful thing. Just like the cattail down, they use the tree lichen, or there's another, this is Saint-Gelais hair or coyote's hair that we talked about. There's a story about that. Basically, coyote was falling out of a tree. I won't tell you the whole story, but coyote was falling out of the tree, and the small little branches were tearing off some of his hair, and so then and they're left in the branches, so it was considered. They thought it was coyote's hair. So one day in the winter you'll get that story. But this is also good. When I talked to some of the elderly women who use this, they said they harvest this for food, to bake with the camas. And through the, oh yeah, okay. Yes, so the name of this Bioindicators Fremonte. Bioindicators Fremonte. Yeah, look up tree lichen, black tree lichen, and you'll get that. The Latin word for that would be Bioindicators Fremonte.
I'll put it in the resources.
Yeah, thanks Jennifer for writing that down for me. So yeah, my dad, he was always the one when we were out cutting firewood, he was always playing around with it. He had kind of a stubbly little chin, and he would put it on his chin and act like he had a beard. So he'd do this with it, right? Or this with it, right? Anyway, this is also another survival material that I've instructed people to do too. Is that if you can get a lot of this and it's dry, and you're limited on your clothing to keep yourself warm, you can start stuffing this in between your clothing, and it holds air, and your body's going to keep that air. It's going to store air in there, and so it's insulation, just like fiberglass or so. Okay, so also when I was talking to this elderly woman about the use of this, she first said, well, it's used for diapers, and then she kind of got a little giggly, and she said, well, and we use it for menstrual pads too, she said, which works really good because it also has antibacterial properties to it, which means it stays clean. So if you're going to use it for a feminine pad or diapers, it's not going to help to promote bacteria to get like diaper rash and things like that. It's going to stay clean.
So you would wrap that around the cattail? Fluff?
Not, well, yeah, you could probably, but you can use it on its own too.
Okay,
Yeah.
what would keep it in place, especially like with a diaper?
You like some nice antelope, soft, thin antelope, brain tanned antelope hide, which is used quite a bit. Antelope hide is used for like undergarments, like smocks or under your buckskin shirt. You use a
It's
small
so soft when tanned well.
Yeah.
So soft.
So yeah, and so antelope hide is really conducive to that. So
And
you could use
the brain tanning, it's the same concept with all ungulates, isn't it? As far as one brain containing enough to tan the hide. And can you talk a little bit about just that science nerd moment? Can you talk a little bit about what that does to the cells and why it works?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like Jennifer was talking about, it's every animal has enough brains in their skull that you can extract to tan their hide. I mean, even humans, we have enough. Sometimes we as humans, we use our brains, we get in trouble, and your mom's going to tan your hide, right? I don't know. For some of you, that's an older term, tanning your hide. But so anyway, that in a figurative sense, you get in trouble because you use your brain. And yeah. Beyond that, okay. So the brains in all of our brains, animal brains, a lot of it is fat and oils. And so that's why it's really nice to be able to soak your hide in the animal brains. What it is that animal and human skin hide has fibers in it too that lock together. And so rawhide, when it gets hard, this is strips of rawhide, and you can see how rigid it is. Well, those are the fibers locked together, and then there's a kind of a mucus, kind of a substance that's also like hide glue in a way. You know, it welds those fibers together. Well, in the hide processing, you are stretching those fibers and you are soaking it in water, and you're also, with your draw knife, you're pulling a lot of that fluid that was in there, locking those fibers together, and you're replacing that fluid with the brain matter, which is like 90% fat and oils. And so then the fat and oils are lubricating all those fibers in the hide and keeping them loose and with fat, basically. So when you touch the softness of a brain tan hide, you're kind of touching those oils and fats that are part of the brain. And that's what keeps it nice and pliable and flexible, and not binding back together into this rigid rawhide state, because you can't make any clothes out of that. But this is good for hafting tools to get it.
And when you take the enzymes from the brain, it turns cells hydrophobic, which restrict water molecule movement and therefore make the hide water resistant or even water repellent, depending upon the process, which also smoke tanning also contributes to that.
Yeah. A lot of times they say, a white hide is just brain tan without smoking, and then you got the hide that's smoked. When you go through water, buckskin will get somewhat wet, but when you're drying it out, the white hide that's not smoked will have a little bit of stiffness to it. You got to kind of work it a little bit. But the smoked hide, brain tan smoked hide over here, it remains more flexible. You don't have to really kind of get that smoking. I have to, I guess, just explore that aspects of what the smoke does to those individuals.
So it's a great example of how Western science and indigenous knowledges work together, right? And how you can incorporate some of this knowledge into what you're teaching already.
Yeah. Okay.
Yay!
So.
This is one of my favorite plants.
Whoa, we got all this seeds.
Yeah, there's some seeds here.
I
too
brought the
that
seed
stuck.
heads. Yeah, this is what I harvested this plant last fall. And now the seed heads are starting to open up.
Are they heliotropes?
You'll have to explain that to me.
So they're like, they fly off. They have like little helicopter motion and
Yeah.
they fly off, and that's how they get distributed
Like a
on the
dandelion.
landscape. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is the dogbane plant here, and it's heliotrope seed.
I believe
Seed-
that's the correct
seed
term. I'm sure
transportation.
that somebody like Carolyn can correct me here. She's
Right.
smiling. She's like, yep, I've got the term. She's gonna put it in chat.
You know, and then the dogbane plant is close relative to the milkweed plant too, which the milkweed has that silk or down, the seed down coming out of it too. And just as the milkweed is a good plant for pollinators to feed on, so is dogbane. Dogbane is also good for pollinators. And as we know today, we're having issues with our pollinators with herbicides, pesticides and such that are put on the landscape. And it's harming our bees and such. Especially with milkweed and dogbane, the moths and butterflies, they're good pollinators too. And so we need them around. I'm just pulling off the seed heads here because I am planning on growing our own dogbane here on the campus because I use this a lot in my classes. And there's a growing interest in making rope and string in this plant. And again, not just for the making rope and string, but also for pollinators and supporting our ecosystems. Okay, so the Latin name is Apocynon cannabinium, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correct. But cannabinium means cannabis-like, and that's only for the fibers that are in here, because like cannabis, it has fibers, and of course we used to make textiles and ropes out of the cannabis, the industrial hemp. This is called the Indian hemp, and there are two types of dogbane in the Northwest here. This is the hemp dogbane. Then you have the spreading dogbane that you find up in the mountains, and you can make a rope and string from both of those, even the ones in the mountains. It's just a smaller stalk, and you get these smaller branches, and it may not be worth it to make cordage out of it. But this plant lives along some of the major streams and lakes. So the Clark Fork, the Jocko River, Blackfoot River, a lot of the major rivers will have this growing along its banks. It likes a little bit more water. It doesn't grow in the dry areas very well. And it's perennial, which is really good. Most of my plants that I work with bring into the classroom are perennials, so that you can go out, and I have a patch of dogbane that I go out and I can take the whole patch out, and I know that next spring it's going to be there again. So I like that. I appreciate having these plants that are sustainable. Okay, so then now I've got the stalk here. I'm going to demonstrate how to make rope and string from it. You harvest it in the late fall, early winter, and when the leaves, there's different tribes. I guess the Nez Perce will harvest it right after the leaves turn yellow. I harvest it when the leaves are already off, and I pick the most viable stalks. Okay, let's come in here, and I'll pinch the stalk all the way down. Sometimes they're a little tough, and I got to stand on it, pop them. And then I take the stalk, and then I'm also pinching it so that it's separating in 4 pieces now. even pieces. You can kind of see that. And then I'm going to come into the center with my thumb and split it open. And then we have, here's the inner woody part right there. And again, it's in the bark where all the fibers are, and it's part of the cambium. The cambium, the fibers are the cambium of this plant. Okay, and we've got the base of the plant, and I'm going to start busting out the center of that. These nice little ribbons of bark. This is what we want to keep. All the fibers are in there, and we'll discard the inner wood there. And so technique and processing are really important so that you get a nice clean release of that bark from the inner woody material.
I'm gonna
Okay, should I
try
get
to,
up a little bit closer?
yeah, yeah.
All right.
You make it look so easy.
Yeah, that's that's about 30 years of work right here that I've been doing this for about 30 years. And it kind of amazed me the other day when I started looking at all my projects. And it essentially started with the Indian Ed for All contracts that the public schools were getting from the state of Montana. And they would hire me to come into the schools and teach about our local tribes.
Remember when we were, I think it was at River Honoring, and you and me and Tony Inkashola, you were trying to teach me how to do this, and Tony was laughing at me.
That's right, he was.
He really was, but that's a sign of love.
Yep. And yeah, so the Salish name for the making of this is Spätzle, to make some Spätzle, or the Spätzle plant. It's the rope plant. And yeah, this is amazing, really amazing plant. It's the fibers, you can make textiles from the fibers just as you can the industrial hemp, and they are stronger than cotton, but they can also get softer than cotton. They're processed properly. Okay, so you can kind of see nice ribbons of bark there. You can see those little feathery fibers there. Okay, I'm going to split it in half, and then I'm going to match the thick and the thin so that my cordage is more uniform in thickness. Okay, so then I'm going to take the stalk, the ribbons of bark, halfway mark, and I'm going to rub them with my hands back and forth. And what that does, that's going to consolidate all those fibers into a manageable strand, while it cleaning out some of the little flaking out some of the bark that's covering those fibers. We'll go down the stalk, and we'll continue to process the fibers. And what we basically are processing here is yarn at this time. So it's all the fibers are laying next to each other, just as yarn is. That's a yarn. And then it isn't until we start twisting, doing the cordage twist, is where they get the strength. Actually the science behind cordage works is the twisting action on that, and that typical rope or string kind of pattern. We call it a Z twist is one term for it. It's a 2-ply Z twist. Okay. So yes, at this time, I'm just going to consolidate those fibers a little bit more, going through.
It's good.
Okay,
It's awesome.
nice.
I hope it's awesome. I can't read the chat right now because I'm leaning over a table, but I can see the picture.
Okay, so then there's your fiber strand. And I'm going to start in the middle here.
Oh, thank you, Michelle. Michelle says it's amazing.
All
That
right,
popped up.
great. So I'm going to twist her a little bit. Then I'm gonna let it come together in a little nice little kink or loop. Then I'm gonna grab that with my left hand, forefinger and thumb. Then I'll start with the top fiber strand. I'll twist out, hold that twist. Then I'll grab that other strand and I'll twist back to myself. My left hand will go up right where it joined, and then I'll release, start again. Top fiber strand, grab, pull back. Just twist out, twist back, twist out, and then twist back. Now you kind of start to see that pattern of rope, string, the Z, 2-ply Z twist. Twist out, hold, and then twist back to yourself. So they're kind of, if we twisted it all the same, it would just kind of unravel, but we're twisting it into each other, and it holds the fibers fairly well that way. Okay, so I'm gonna speed it up just a little bit here. And again, I've been doing this for probably about 30 years, so it becomes really automatic. I can sit in the living room with my wife, and we can watch TV, watch a program, and then I can continue to twist this cordage, especially for your fish traps. You need a lot of cordage for that. And
have you ever made a whole fish trap before, or fish net like Frank did?
No, but that's one area that I want. One of my goals is to make nets. Yep. And I'm not sure what kind of material what he uses.
Well, the one he demonstrated with at I think it was at a Montana Teacher Leader in the Arts program years ago was actual just like nylon string. But he used the same concept, and he was making it was huge, and it was multicolored. It was beautiful.
Nice.
Everyone was kind of in awe of it. That's Frank Finley. He teaches in this building.
Yep. And he's my cousin, well, Finley clan. And we support each other in our traditional arts this way. And we get together and we talk about different techniques. And he does this, he makes his cordage with the leg roll, which I'm not the best at. You can do it, but I like the control I have with my fingers, and I can usually go just as fast, almost as fast as he can with his leg roll. I have more control over it with the finger twist like this than the leg roll. But that's what's so nice about this is that as teachers, we do support each other, that we do it differently, and we accept that. That's just another method.
Essential understanding number 2, individual diversity.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a basic cord, and some of the sciences behind the cord is that when I have my students sometimes hold their fingers together, and it's really easy to pull them apart. That's the yarn, right? But once you kind of fold your fingers upon each other and try to pull, compression happens. So when you pull on this, the fibers are coming down upon each other and compressing, and not allowing the individual fibers to slide beside each other and detach. So the science is compression with
And friction. Is that a
friction would be
property
one
of
too.
friction?
Sure.
Let's see. Okay, now that I'm sitting back down, amazing, very cool pattern. Wow, so cool. Amazing. Wow, goodness, that's amazing. You have done this before.
Yeah, I sure have.
So being that it's 1 o'clock, so we technically have a half hour more. Would you like to hear more from Tim? And I'll check in like another 15 minutes. What do you all, or 20 minutes? What do you all think? More stuff. Yes, please. Definitely more. Keep going. More. Okay, I could be here all day. I know, me too, Tanya, chemist root. Keep going, Tim. All right, well, there you have it. I had a feeling that,
Okay. Let me. Oh, okay, we're talking about cordage again.
oh, yeah.
This is an interesting one. This little strip here is bark, but this is the bitter cherry or the pin cherry bark. This isn't choke cherry. Okay, so this ties and binds things. So there's a fair amount of the sturgeon nose canoes that are made. There's a fair amount of the Kootenays in Canada, when they make their sturgeon nose, they tie it all with pin cherry or bitter cherry bark. And that's what this is here. And it's a form of, not cordage, but it's a form of a tying and binding material. And it is really, it's pretty strong. And that's just, so then the bark on a branch, you would score it in a spiral around the branch, and then you would pull it off the branch that way. Again, in the spring is the right time to do that, but that's pretty interesting. No one knows about that too much, and I'm just learning about it myself. But it's strips of thin cherry bark, the wild cherry bark or pin cherry, that's used as a tying and binding. Like I said, the Kootenays, they tied and bound a whole sturgeon nose canoe with this material. Ethnographically, Tate and Boaz, Schaefer, they're all ethnographers that came to the Northwest in the early 1900s. And they talked about some of these, how the canoes were made down in the States here, that most of the tribes used the dogbane cordage to tie and bind it, while up in Canada, they used more of the pin cherry. We have an individual, Wayne McCoy, who is more of a Canadian Kootenai. He's working with the Two Eagle River School kids, and he makes sturgeon nose canoes, and he talks a lot about the use of this. Now, I was wondering why do the Canadian Kootenays or Salish people use more of the cherry bark than the dogbane? It sounds like they've got more pin cherry up there than we do down here. So there's availability of that material, of that plant, that they use that more up there than down here. Because the ethnographers say that it was used, both ones were used equally, but by different tribes. So regionally, different areas, the available resources of what they were using. So that was that. Okay, kind of a fun thing I want to show you here. We're going to have to get pretty close for this one. A lot of my experiences with like the fish trap. I was guided by Eneas Vanderburg of the Vanderburg family, a dear elder of mine who has passed away now. But I asked him about the fish trap. I said, "Did we make fish traps too?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Yes, we used to make them when I was younger." He said, and I said, "What do you make them out of?" And he said, "Chicken wire." So they were making their fish traps out of chicken wire. And I said, "Oh wow," I laughed about that a little bit. I said, "Well, how was it designed?" And he described the same design as what you saw, that fish trap. It had that inner cone to it, and that was the whole trick. You could create any kind of body of fish trap, but it had to have that cone in there that the fish would come in and they get confused. They really didn't see that opening like they think. Well, Eneas Vandenberg also taught me another fishing device, and that is a hawthorn fishing hook. And it's going to be hard to see, but
maybe against
oh, that would be good. Yeah.
piece of paper.
And I did have a.
I think you can even come towards me more and go up, up, up and in. Yay, there we go. That's a great view. Yep. So that's a thorn.
Yeah. So here.
And a visitor.
And a visitor.
Crawling on the.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. Stop moving around, Tim. So the fish hook here, or the hawthorn, you bust it in the middle and it hinges on itself. It doesn't break cleanly. It breaks on one side and then it's hinged on the other, it's still attached. And then I take the tree pitch glue that I make. You get pitch off of like ponderosa vine or any other tree, and you melt that down, and then you grind charcoal down to create the yeah. So this black material is the tree pitch glue that I make from tree pitch, melted down. Then I take charcoal from a burnt log, I grind that down and I mix it up, a 1-to-1 mixture. And it creates this hard kind of glue, pitch glue. Well, when I bend or break that hawthorn, I hold it in place and then dip it in the hot pitch glue that will hold that hawthorn at an angle for the hook. And then when it cools down, it hardens.
And will that weight also help make it sink?
Yes, but you'll be surprised. It isn't that heavy. It's just more of a it's more of a glue, a cement that holds that thorn in the right place, and it doesn't have too much weight on it.
So is it more like a fly?
Oh, well, it could be, but no. I would when you put bait on it, it
Okay.
will sink.
So the bait makes it heavy.
Yep, and I have made my Mike Derglow Sr. had described how they made sinkers with a flat tabular rock that they put 2 notches in and tied it up farther on the line. And so then the bait would kind of, from the bottom of the stream, it would kind of float up. And so it would kind of move around and the fish, it would attract the fish and such.
Is there a best time to harvest the thorn?
You know, I've harvested thorn year round, but you don't want a really dried out old thorn, because that will break and it won't hinge on itself. So if it's got a little bit of greenness, it'll hinge on itself, and then you dip it in that hot pitch glue and let it cool down, and it'll hold its shape.
And the cordage is just miniature, and you do same process. It's
Yep.
just literally like microscopic.
Yeah, that's
Holy moly.
the cordage again, just on a smaller scale. So this is how thin my fishing line is. This is how.
There we go. They're perfect.
Okay. So when I make fishing line, it's this thickness too.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's fun stuff. So my students get the opportunity to make some of these too. That works really well. Just to demonstrate on this glue how solid it is. I mean, it's not soft and pliable. It's really hard as I hit it against that rock. So this is my glue stick. And ideally, you carry this when you're traveling, and say you have to rehaft, you have to mount an arrowhead back on the shaft. I just stick this in the ground next to the fire and then let it warm up. Then I'm able to pull off a little bit. I'm able to, like just put my arrow shaft on it and then pull off some of that hot pitch glue and then put the arrowhead into the shaft with the hot pitch glue and let it dry or let it cool down. Okay. So continuing on with other items here, here's some more tree. This is lichen too. This is called wolf lichen. You can see how yellow it is, almost bright fluorescent yellow there. I can make a yellow paint pigment from this material here.
Oh, wow.
And so then you let it dry out completely. And then you grind it up with a rock in a mortar and pestle and into a fine powder. And then you can just mix water with it to paint, or you can mix like bear grease, like a nice thin viscous oil is nice for that. Or like deer tallow, you melt that down too. And then you can make the paint with that paint pigment from the lichen, the yellow lichen.
Oh, yeah, you did that recently with Polson Middle School.
Yeah. And then, there's green lichens out there that I use, and then yellow lichens. For black, you just use charcoal. You grind that up for black color.
Pigments is a fantastic both art and science lesson.
Yes. Pigments is a lot of fun.
What about do you have some roots and seeds in the box?
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, you know what would be nice? Okay, so we talked about the cambium, right? So here's some of the cambium from a ponderosa pine tree. This is used for food. So we've had the subject of cambium with making cordage, making baskets. Now here's cambium used to actually eat and ingest food-wise.
Just raw? How do you consume it?
Okay, so there's a process usually like on ponderosa pines, lodgepole. Any tree has cambium in it, but more the lodgepole and the ponderosa pine were more preferred for eating the cambium. The bark was pried off, and then this small thin layer of the cambium was then scraped off the inner wood there, or on the bark after it's pulled off. And then it was eaten in strips like that. Although at the time when it's fresh, you can taste the sweetness and the nutrients in it, but it's also got a little bit of like a turpentine kind of taste to it. So when you dry it, that dissipates out of there, and it's more of a mellower taste, more of a sweeter taste that you get from it. It was a springtime activity. Again, when all the nutrients started to flow and feed the tree through its cambium, through the xylem and phloem, the two layers of the cambium. One way was to eat it in strips. Another way was when in this dry state, was to grind it down into a powder and then put it into a buckskin bag, and then add it to your foods to flavor your foods. So it was kind of like a spice, or more not a spice, but more of a flavor enhancing, more of a sweetness. And it was said that it was a treat for the kids in the springtime. After the winter and you're eating all your dried goods, and you probably need a change of your diet a little bit and taste of foods, that's what that would represent you. So all across really the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of tribes who scarred trees to get the cambium. Even Scandinavian countries did. A lot of the Scandinavian people and tribes also scarred the trees for food and the cambium. So they have a tradition. They have a lot of these living artifacts, these trees that are still living, that are a product of our ancestors from taking the bark off and extracting the cambium. And through my archaeological work, I have documented and mapped and recorded a majority of these trees all through the Western Montana. And right now, they are in danger. They're in danger because we have suppressed fire. Fire has kept those low growth trees alive by keeping the fuels down around those ponderosa pine. And I will go so far to say that all old growth forests were a product of our tribes setting fire to the landscape, because a natural fire regime would not allow those trees to get that big, because of fuels build up every now and then major fires come through and they die. But our seasonal use of fire had kept those fuels down, so that those trees could keep on living. And they're here today because of the indigenous peoples of the Northwest.
And some of them are massive.
Yes,
Like the one that you took me to just, when we were river honoring one year.
Yeah.
And I stood next to it. It was huge. I have that picture in here somewhere.
Yep. And we've got these culturally scarred or culturally modified trees, CMTs are what they're called, all over the Flathead Lake and Wild Horse Island in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And they're beautiful, like I say, they're living artifacts. They're out there and they need to be managed. We've got to clear the fuels around these large old growth so that they'll continue to live through the years for next generations and such. So I'm kind of on a campaign to change that management.
That's such an amazing story when you were able to go into the Bob Marshall Wilderness with all those elders. That must have been an extraordinary experience.
Well, that was exactly, that was the highlight. One of the highlights of my career was to take 3 elders, Louis Adams, Francis Vandenberg, and Enos Vandenberg, horseback and them in the Bob Marshall, 4 different ways. We did this 4 years in a row, and we recorded all the trails, the stories, the camps, and the place names that were back in Bob Marshall. And even that's where the last stories and sightings of Sasquatch, Stwene, which is that's my Salish name is Stwene, which means Sasquatch, and that was given to me by Francis Vandenberg in Bob Marshall. So, yep, got my name back there too, and those were the last stories that we had of Sasquatch, and the elders had talked about that. You don't have to be scared or worried about Sasquatch. Sasquatch is kind of like a trickster in a way. He'll let you know he's around, because you see, if you get up, the elders say, if you get up the next morning and the horse's hair is braided, he said then you know you've been visited by Sasquatch. Another story is where they're camped back there, and all of a sudden their dog was thrown through the smoke flaps and landed in the fire in the teepee, and that was and then the dog wasn't going to go out then because she was scared, and then hid under some of the bedding, and so they knew it was Swene that was out there playing tricks on them.
So these stories are really important.
Yeah,
for cultural continuity, and it's like encyclopedic knowledge.
Yeah, the art of storytelling was really important in every family to teach your children how to conduct yourself with other people, how the morals of being who you are. Other instructions of gathering food and making tools are played out in stories. The history of your family, the perspectives, the reciprocity with other beings, and the resources that you harvest from are bound in story and in song to transfer that. Information transfer being very important for the next generation. If you didn't do that, we wouldn't be here right now. So we are all a product of storytelling that got us here today.
So if I'm a teacher and maybe I'm not Native or maybe I'm not Salish or Kootenai, is it okay to share certain stories? Is there a protocol for when we hear a story, how to share it with our students? Yeah,
I think there is. It is learning. It's reaching out to the tribes to learn about their traditions of storytelling. Like we have here in the Northwest, we have tribes that it's taboo to tell those stories out of season. And so then once you know the protocol, there's usually tribes will share those stories with you. We have some of the publications through OPI and other publications that the culture committees put out, Salish Kootenai College puts out, has disclaimers in them. If they are sensitive coyote stories, then they will say, please do not tell these stories until the winter time. So we hope that teachers would adhere to that tradition, just because of we're concerned about what may happen to these people too. We want to make sure that they're safe, and that tradition is respected, so that we don't lose that friendship between that working relationship between you as teachers and the tribes that you're working with. I know it gets it's a little scary maybe to approach tribes and stuff like that, but most tribes are really, once you reach out to them, and that you show your intent and your respect, that's cooperation. That's creating that friendship, that partnership in education. That's real important.
Sure is. So in our last few minutes here, we talked a little bit about Western science and indigenous knowledge systems. Yeah. And if I'm a teacher and I've never really considered the differences before, or that even traditional ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge fits into my science classroom, or even my social studies, or multidisciplinary. Do you have any advice or thoughts on how to integrate things that are learned from tribes about the environment?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of information out there on the internet, start there. But I think, creating those relationships with tribes so that you can bring in knowledgeable traditional elders to share those stories and to expound upon them is a bit more experiential learning kind of approach to it. And I try to be that for my students more than to read secondhand from other experiences, but I draw from my own experience too. But I think reaching out with good intent and respect, and I don't think there's an issue with that. But you can start with the internet. With some, there is a lot of OPI has
reach out to me.
A lot of research, and Jennifer, yeah, definitely. And I when these questions come up, or when teachers are requesting more resources from me, I send them to Jennifer and OPI because a lot of that information has already been sanctioned by the tribes. Mm-hmm. It's already been reviewed by them, and you won't get in trouble by using that. I mean, there is some research out there that may not address some of those issues of tradition, and they may be in other ways of being in more of a anthropological way, and not as a personal a connection with the indigenous people, and getting their firsthand reasons and perspectives of why and why not to teach, to tell those stories, or the sensitivities of those stories, or to reflect on some of that old storytelling had language in it that was pretty offensive. And you have to watch out for that. And who was the source coming from? The primary sources are very important. So the books that I see that maybe those ethnographers, that was actually an interview that they did with certain elders of my ancestors. I usually can feel good about that information, and a lot of that is even reviewed through the culture committees, and so they even review it too to assure that that is still appropriate information. Even though, because these ethnographers from back in the early 1900s, some of them may not be getting all the total story, or they might be getting some other story that isn't correct, or cultures are dynamic in a way too, and they change, and they have to. Some have to catch up to the modern days, and so some things they might not have been appropriate in those days may be appropriate today, or not appropriate today. So, yeah, you do have to be careful with the information, and but going through the whole PI, I feel very comfortable about that information. And the college here too, we have a wealth of resources too.
Are there any teacher workshops that happen here at SKC?
I don't think so. I think that's one area that we probably, we are working with some of the local schools though too. We have our cultural language program. We have apprentices that are reaching out to the middle schools, and they're bringing the language in. And I'm teaching the teachers now how to do some of these traditional skills. So it's just not me running around to all the schools. Now I'm teaching the teachers, and now we have a greater capacity to meet that need of the public for this traditional information and perspective from our local tribes from this area. So it is, well, thank God too, because that's helping me a lot.
Yeah, you've been a little busy. But people were saying, gosh, it would be great if you presented at MEA and or MFPE or whatever the acronym is now. But you have for years, and now you're a little busy.
Yeah, well, I've taken a break from that too, and I do want to get back into that. So,
but I can maybe recruit someone like Rose Bear Don't Walk, and or Annie, and
sure.
So there are good people to recruit for that. So thank you for that suggestion. And just one final note is that this knowledge exists today. This is not all just historical and in the past. Tim is here today making these things today. These are contemporary. I use my berry basket because I was told if the basket was made for using, and so it's very important to keep that contemporary perspective, elevated along with all of the historical and ancestral information.
There you go. Yep. I mean, these beings, this is a being, and it wants to be used. it wants to live. So put them to work.
Awesome. Oh, doing a standalone. Yes, well, we can possibly discuss that further. So definitely put that on your email. So at this point, I'm gonna turn the camera around, and I just want to say thank you to Tim Lemlitz. Your friendship is such a gift, and your knowledge is just I'm so humbled by it, and I'm so humbled that you said yes to this with your very busy schedule. And I can tell all of the love from the teachers popping up in the chat right now, but in the chat also, and I will try to see if I can do this again right now. Please do make sure that you complete the feedback survey. It's one of the last links here. Complete that feedback survey so that we can justify doing events like this into the future, even if you're not seeking renewal units. And again, I try to read through every single one of them and do something with your suggestions. So that's how this workshop came to be. I am just so thankful, so grateful that you have opted again to use your Saturday to increase your background knowledge. Please sign up for our free virtual Indian Education for All Best Practices Conference. Again, the link I put right above the survey link, and above that is the resource link. So please make sure I tried to add resources that we talked about today. But thank you all so much. Go out, get some fresh air, and feel connected to all of the natural world outside of you. And again, Tim, thank you so much. Thanks, teachers.
Thanks, teachers, for spending your time with me today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, teachers, for spending